Sit down, child. Yes, right there by the fire. These old bones feel the cold now, even in September. You want to know about Mr. Eric's parents? About how the Cutter family truly began? Pour yourself some tea. This story takes time. And it starts in a way you might not expect. With fear, not love. With a woman loading a rifle because she thought death was coming for her. It was October of 1873. I was 35 years old then, working as cook for a man the town called Dangerous. A giant, they whispered. A creature best avoided. They were wrong, of course, but people often are, especially when they're afraid. The woman's name was Delilah Marsh, 30 years old, widow for 2 years, and so thin from struggle you could count her ribs through her dress. Her homestead sat 3 miles from town, and every morning she woke up wondering if this would be the day she finally lost everything. The man? Ephraim Cutter, 7.5 feet tall, Norwegian blood running back to the old country where giants were said to walk among men. He'd been watching her for weeks, and she was about to put a bullet in him for it. That's how love started between them, with a loaded Winchester and a misunderstanding that could have ended in blood. Let me tell you how it really happened. The first time Delilah Marsh saw the rider on the ridge, she thought her eyes were playing tricks. It was early morning, the kind of cold October dawn that warned of winter's approach. She'd been hauling water from the creek, the wooden buckets heavy enough to make her shoulders ache. When she straightened up to catch her breath, that's when she saw him. A massive figure on horseback, silhouetted against the pale sky, just standing there, watching. She froze, water sloshing over the bucket's rim and soaking her already worn boots. Her heart kicked hard against her ribs. The figure didn't move, didn't call out, just sat there on that ridge too far away to make out features, but close enough that she could see he was larger than any man had a right to be. Then he turned his horse and disappeared over the rise. Delilah stood there another full minute, breathing hard before she convinced her legs to move. She hauled those buckets back to the house faster than she'd ever moved, spilling half the water on the way. Once inside, she dropped the buckets and went straight to the window. Nothing. The ridge was empty. Morning light turned the prairie grass to gold, but there was no rider, no horse. Maybe she'd imagined it. But 3 days later, she saw him again. This time she was in the garden, pulling up the last of the potatoes before the first hard freeze could ruin them. The work was backbreaking. 2 years of doing everything alone had taught her that there was no such thing as easy labor on a homestead. But she needed every potato she could salvage. Winter was coming, and her pantry looked like a picked-over grave. She felt him before she saw him, that prickle on the back of her neck that means someone's watching. Delilah straightened slowly, a potato still clutched in her dirt-covered hand. She turned toward the tree line to the north, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. There, at the edge of the cottonwoods, maybe 200 yards out, the same massive figure on the same dark horse, close enough now that she could tell he wore a wide-brimmed hat and a long coat. Close enough that she could see how his shoulders seemed twice as broad as a normal man's, close enough to be a real threat. Her mouth went dry. Out here, 3 miles from the nearest neighbor, a woman alone was vulnerable in ways townfolk never understood. There were good men on the frontier, yes, but there were other kinds too, the kind who saw an isolated widow as an opportunity. "What do you want?" she called out, though she knew he was too far away to hear. The figure didn't move, didn't answer, just sat there like a statue carved from shadow. Delilah's hands were shaking now. She dropped the potato and started backing toward the house, slowly, not taking her eyes off the rider. Her rifle was inside, propped by the door where she kept it loaded. If she could just get to it. The rider shifted. For a moment she thought he was going to spur his horse forward, and her heart nearly stopped. But instead he turned, slow and deliberate, and rode back into the trees. Gone again. That night Delilah didn't sleep. She sat in her rocking chair with the Winchester across her lap, watching the windows, jumping at every creak of the settling house. When dawn finally came, she was exhausted and angry. If someone was trying to frighten her off her land, they'd chosen the wrong woman. She'd survived her husband's death, survived 2 winters that would have broken most men, survived debt collectors and wolves, and a town that had stopped caring whether she lived or died. Some stranger on horseback wasn't going to be the thing that finally broke her. The third time she saw him, Delilah was ready. A week had passed. She'd started to think maybe he'd moved on, whoever he was. Maybe he'd just been a drifter passing through. Maybe she'd overreacted. Then, on a gray morning that smelled like snow, she looked out her kitchen window and saw him standing at the edge of her property. Not on the ridge this time, not in the trees. Right there, maybe 50 yards from her front door, on the other side of the fence line that marked where her land ended and the open range began. Just standing there, watching her house. Something inside Delilah snapped. She'd spent 2 years being afraid of starving, afraid of freezing, afraid of losing everything Thomas had died trying to provide. She was done being afraid of some saddle tramp who thought he could intimidate a lone woman. Delilah grabbed her rifle, checked that it was loaded, and marched out onto her front porch. The October wind cut through her thin shawl like it wasn't even there, but she didn't care. She raised the Winchester to her shoulder, aimed at the sky, and fired. The crack of the gunshot echoed across the prairie like thunder. The figure's horse startled, dancing sideways. But the rider stayed mounted, calm as you please, like women shot at him every day of the week. "You've got 1 minute." Delilah shouted, her voice carrying on the wind. "State your business, or get off my land before I aim lower." She levered another round into the chamber. The metallic click-clack sounded loud in the morning quiet. For a long moment, nothing happened. The rider sat there on his nervous horse, still as stone. Delilah's hands were shaking from cold and adrenaline, but she kept the rifle up, kept her aim steady. Then he moved, dismounted in one smooth motion, and started walking toward her, hands held away from his sides where she could see them. Empty hands, no weapon drawn. "That's far enough," she called when he was 30 yards out. He stopped. And that's when she got her first real look at him. Dear God, he was enormous. Not fat. There wasn't an ounce of excess on him. Just big. Tall as a barn door and built like he could pull a plow himself if the mule gave out. Even at this distance, she could see his shoulders were broader than any man she'd ever known. His hands, held out to show they were empty, looked like they could palm a man's head like an apple. But it was his face that made her finger ease off the trigger. Young still, couldn't be past his mid-30s. Wheat gold hair showing beneath his hat. And eyes. Even from here she could see they were pale blue, like winter sky. Not cruel eyes, not mean, scared eyes. He was afraid of her. The realization hit Delilah like a slap. This massive man, this giant who'd been watching her for weeks, was standing in her yard with his hands up, looking like he expected her to shoot him. And maybe thought he deserved it. "I'm not armed, ma'am," he called out. His voice was deep, like distant thunder, but gentle. "Careful. I apologize for frightening you. That wasn't my intention." "Then what was your intention?" Her voice came out harder than she meant it to. "You've been watching me for weeks, lurking around my property like some kind of—" She couldn't think of a word harsh enough. "What do you want?" He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely loud enough to carry. "Permission to approach, ma'am, so we can speak without shouting." Every instinct Delilah had screamed at her to say no, to send him away, to keep the rifle up and the distance between them. But something in his voice, that careful gentleness, that deep respect, made her pause. "Hands where I can see them," she said finally, and slow. "Yes, ma'am." He walked toward her like he was approaching a spooked horse. Slow steps, hands still out, eyes on her face, not on the rifle. When he was 10 feet from the porch, she held up one hand. "That's close enough." He stopped immediately, and now that he was close, Delilah could see just how wrong she'd been about him. He wasn't just tall. He was a genuine giant, the kind old country stories talked about. 7 feet at least, maybe more. His coat was homemade, she realized. It would have to be, to fit shoulders like that. His hands were scarred from work, nails clean but permanently stained. A working man's hands. And his face. Lord, but he had the saddest eyes she'd ever seen. "My name is Ephraim Cutter," he said quietly. "I own land 20 miles north of here, up in the high country near Eagles Pass. I've been in the territory for 3 years." Eagles Pass. The name sent a chill through Delilah that had nothing to do with the October wind. That's where Thomas had died, where they'd found his frozen body still clutching the reins of their old mare. If Ephraim Cutter noticed her reaction, he didn't show it. He just stood there, patient as a mountain, waiting for her to respond. "That doesn't explain why you've been watching me, Mr. Cutter." "No, ma'am, it doesn't." He took a breath, like he was steadying himself for something difficult. "I've been trying to find the courage to speak to you. Took me 3 weeks to work up to it. I apologize for frightening you in the meantime." Delilah's grip on the rifle loosened slightly. "Courage to speak to me about what?" "About a proposition, ma'am. One that might benefit us both." A proposition. Delilah's stomach clenched. She'd heard about propositions from strange men before. Offers that had nothing to do with honest work and everything to do with a woman's desperation. Her finger found the trigger again. "I'm not interested in that kind of proposition, Mr. Cutter. You can get back on your horse and—" "Marriage, ma'am." The word hit her like a thunderclap. For a moment she was sure she'd misheard. "What?" "I'm proposing marriage." His voice was steady now, like he'd committed to a course and wouldn't turn back. "I know it sounds like madness. A man you've never spoken to, showing up at your door with talk of matrimony. But I'm asking you to hear me out before you decide I'm crazy." Delilah stared at him. The rifle sagged in her hands, forgotten. Of all the things she'd expected, threats, propositions, even robbery, this had never crossed her mind. "You don't even know me," she managed. "I know enough." Ephraim's hands finally lowered, slow and careful. "I know you've been working this land alone for 2 years. I know you lost your husband to the mountains. I know every morning you get up and fight a battle most men would have surrendered by now. I know you're still here, still fighting, which tells me everything I need to know about your character." "You've been spying on me." "I've been watching," he corrected gently. "There's a difference. I've watched you repair your own fence, patch your own roof, haul water and chop wood and do the work of 3 men because there's no one else to do it. I've watched you survive, Mrs. Marsh, and I admire the hell out of you for it." The honesty in his voice was almost worse than if he'd been lying. Delilah felt heat rise in her cheeks, whether from anger or embarrassment she couldn't tell. "Admiration isn't a reason for marriage, Mr. Cutter." "No, ma'am, but need is." He took off his hat, revealing hair the color of wheat fields in autumn. "I'm 34 years old. I have good land, water rights, timber. I have money in the bank and skills enough to keep us fed and warm. What I don't have is a wife. What I don't have is family." His voice dropped lower. "And what you don't have, Mrs. Marsh, is security. You don't have someone to help shoulder the load. You don't have protection against another winter that could kill you just as sure as it killed your husband." Delilah's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, wanted to throw his words back at him and tell him she didn't need his pity or his charity. But the truth was, a weight in her chest she couldn't deny. He was right. Another winter alone would probably kill her. "Why me?" The question came out smaller than she intended. "There are younger women in town, prettier women with dowries and families to recommend them. Why would you want a worn-out widow with nothing to her name?" Ephraim's expression softened. "Because when I watched you split that wood last week, I saw a woman who doesn't give up. I saw strength that has nothing to do with muscle and everything to do with heart. That's worth more than all the dowries in the territory." He stepped closer, just one step, and Delilah was surprised to find she didn't raise the rifle. "I'm not asking you to love me, Mrs. Marsh. I know that's not something that can be demanded or bought, but I'm asking you to let me stand beside you, to share the burden of survival, to build something together that's stronger than what either of us could manage alone." The wind picked up, scattering leaves across the yard. Delilah pulled her shawl tighter, suddenly aware of how thin it was, how worn her dress, how the entire homestead around them showed signs of losing ground to the wilderness. "And what do you get out of this arrangement, Mr. Cutter?" His pale eyes met hers directly. "A family. Children, if God wills it. Someone to leave my land to when I'm gone. someone to share meals with and talk to in the evenings, someone who knows what it's like to fight for what's yours. He paused. I've been alone a long time, Mrs. Marsh. I'm tired of it. There was such naked honesty in his voice that Delilah had to look away. When was the last time anyone had spoken to her like this? Not with pity or judgment, but with simple, direct truth. I need time to think, she heard herself say. Of course. Ephraim put his hat back on. I'm staying at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house in town. When you've made your decision, you'll know where to find me. He started to turn away, then paused. Mrs. Marsh, one more thing. What? By winter, he said quietly, you'll have my son growing inside you. That's not a demand. It's not pressure. It's just a hope. A promise I'd like to keep if you'll let me. The words should have shocked her, should have offended her. Instead, they sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. There was no lewdness in how he said it, no crude implication. Just a man stating plainly what he wanted from life. A child, a family, a future. I'll think about it, Delilah said again. Ephraim nodded. That's all I can ask. He walked back to his horse with the same careful slowness he'd approached with, mounted up in one smooth motion that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. Before he rode away, he looked back at her one more time. I meant what I said, Mrs. Marsh. You're the strongest person I've ever seen. With or without me, you're going to survive this. But I'd consider it an honor if you'd let me help. Then he was gone, disappearing over the rise the same way he'd appeared all those other times. But this time, Delilah knew who he was, what he wanted, and that scared her more than when she'd thought he was a threat. Because part of her, a part she didn't want to acknowledge, was already considering his offer. I watched all this from the kitchen window of Mr. Ephraim's mountain house 20 miles away. Well, not literally. I couldn't see across that kind of distance, and I wasn't there that particular morning. But I knew it had happened because Mr. Ephraim came back looking like a man who'd just fought a war. His hands were shaking as he put away his horse. I'd never seen him shake before. I did it, Ingrid, he said, when he came into the kitchen. I asked her. I set down my bread dough and wiped my hands. And? She said she'd think about it. I studied his face. 3 years I'd been cooking for this man, watching him build a house for a family he didn't have, carving furniture for children who didn't exist, watching him hope, and trying not to watch that hope die a little more each year. She'll say yes, I told him. How can you be sure? Because I know what winter on the frontier does to a woman alone, and I know you're offering her something more than survival. I picked up my dough again, kneading it with practiced hands. You're offering her a choice. That's a powerful thing, Mr. Ephraim, more powerful than you know. He sat down at my kitchen table, big frame folding into the chair he'd built himself. For a moment he looked young, vulnerable, scared. What if she says no? Then you'll survive it, I said, same as you've survived everything else. But I knew she wouldn't say no. I'd seen desperate women before. I'd been one myself, years ago, before I came to this territory and found work that gave me independence. Delilah Marsh was drowning, and Mr. Ephraim had just thrown her a rope. The only question was whether her pride would let her grab it. Delilah stood on her porch for a long time after Ephraim Cutter rode away. The rifle grew heavy in her hands, but she barely noticed. Her mind was spinning like a wheel stuck in mud, going nowhere fast. Marriage. To a stranger. A giant stranger who'd been watching her like she was some kind of curiosity. It was insane, impossible, improper. It was also the most sensible offer she'd had in 2 years. Finally, the cold drove her inside. Delilah set the rifle by the door and went to the kitchen. She'd been in the middle of making soup when she'd seen him, watery broth with the last of her potatoes, and an onion that was more sprout than vegetable. The fire in the stove had died down to coals. She should restart it, should finish the soup, should get on with the 100 tasks that filled every day. Instead, she sank into the rocking chair Thomas had made their first year of marriage. The chair he'd planned to finish into a set. The chair that now sat alone, like her. Her hand went to the chain around her neck. Thomas's wedding ring hung there, the gold worn smooth from years of wear. She pulled it out and held it up to catch the weak afternoon light filtering through the window. "What do I do?" she whispered to the empty room. "What would you want me to do?" Thomas didn't answer. He never did, no matter how many times she asked. The truth was, she wasn't even sure what Thomas would have wanted. They'd been married young. She was 22, he was 24, and they'd had 4 years together before the mountains took him. 4 years of love, yes, but also 4 years of struggle. Thomas had been full of dreams but short on practical sense. The debt he'd left her with proved that. Would he want her to remarry, or would he expect her to remain faithful to his memory, wearing black and living alone until she died of cold or starvation or simple exhaustion? Delilah pressed the ring to her forehead and closed her eyes. She was so tired. Tired of being cold, tired of being hungry, tired of lying awake at night wondering if this would be the winter that finally won, tired of fighting a battle she was slowly, inevitably losing. Ephraim Cutter was offering her a way out. Not charity, he'd been clear about that, an exchange, her companionship and the possibility of children for his protection and provision, a business arrangement dressed up as matrimony. It wasn't love, but maybe love was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. The knock on her door came 3 hours later, just as the autumn sun was starting to set. Delilah's first thought was that Ephraim had come back. Her heart did something complicated, half hope, half panic. But when she opened the door, it was Martha Henley standing on her porch, face flushed from the 3-mile ride. "Well," Martha said without preamble, "are you going to tell me, or do I have to drag it out of you?" Despite everything, Delilah felt herself smile. Martha had been her closest friend since before Thomas died. If anyone deserved to know what was happening, it was her. "Come in. I'll make tea." "You'll tell me why half the town is buzzing about Ephraim Cutter riding hell-bent toward your place this morning, and how he came back looking like a man who'd just proposed marriage to someone." Delilah's hands stilled on the kettle. "How did you—" "Mrs. Patterson saw him leave the boarding house, said he was dressed in his best shirt and had his grandfather's watch in his pocket. She recognized it from when she was doing his laundry." Martha settled into the chair across from Delilah's. "Now, when a man who's lived alone for 3 years suddenly puts on his best clothes and takes his most precious possession, there's only one thing it means." The kettle started to whistle. Delilah poured water over precious tea leaves, luxuries she could barely afford, and brought 2 cups to the table. Then she told Martha everything, the weeks of watching, the confrontation, the proposal. Martha listened without interrupting. When Delilah finished, her friend sat back and let out a long breath. "Delilah Marsh, you've lost your mind. I haven't accepted yet. But you're considering it." It wasn't a question. Martha's eyes were sharp as she studied Delilah's face. "You're actually considering marrying a man you've never had a conversation with until today. He seems honest. He seems enormous. Delilah, the man is 7 feet tall. They say his hands can break a horse's neck. They say a lot of things that aren't true." Delilah wrapped her hands around her teacup, seeking its warmth. "Did you know the whole town thinks he's dangerous? That he hurt someone years ago and that's why he lives up in the mountains alone?" "There was an incident," Martha admitted. "Some kind of accident at the sawmill when he was younger, but nobody talks about the details." "Maybe that's because the details don't match the story." Delilah took a sip of tea. It was weak. She'd used these leaves 3 times already, but it was warm. "He didn't seem dangerous to me, Martha. He seemed lonely." "Lonely men can be the most dangerous kind. Or the most desperate." Delilah set down her cup. "Like lonely women." Martha's expression softened. She reached across the table and took Delilah's hand. "How bad is it really?" "The truth, now." Delilah looked around her kitchen. At the cracks in the walls, she'd stuffed with rags. At the window, she'd patched with oiled paper because she couldn't afford glass. At the pantry that held maybe 2 weeks of food if she stretched it. "I have $17 left from selling Thomas's tools," she said quietly. "The chicken coop is half destroyed, and I've lost most of my birds to foxes. The roof leaks in 2 places. I owe the general store $12, and winter's coming." "Why didn't you tell me? Carl and I would have—" "I know you would have." Delilah squeezed her friend's hand. "That's why I couldn't tell you. You've already helped so much. The preserves you brought last month, the flour before that. I can't keep taking from you, Martha. I have to find my own way forward. And you think marrying Ephraim Cutter is the way? I think it might be the only way. Delilah pulled her hand back, wrapping both arms around herself. What are my other options? Work as a hired girl in town? I'd make maybe $2 a week if I was lucky. Not enough to keep the homestead. Sell the land? It's mortgaged to the bank already. Thomas saw to that. She felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back angrily. I've tried so hard, Martha. I've done everything I can think of, but I'm failing. Slowly, day by day, I'm losing ground, and I don't know how to stop it. Martha was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle. What do you know about him? Really know, not just what you saw today? Not much, Delilah admitted. He owns land near Eagles Pass. He has money. He's been alone a long time. He's Norwegian, Martha said. Came from Minnesota about 3 years ago, bought land nobody else wanted. Too far from town, too close to the mountains. Built that house with his own hands, every stick of it. Some folks say he's part giant from the old country. Others say he's just unusually tall. What do you say? Martha considered. I say he's always been polite when he comes to town. Pays his bills on time. Doesn't drink much. Doesn't brawl. Keeps to himself, mostly. She paused. And I say he's been looking at you for months, Delilah. Every time he came to town, his eyes would search until he found you. I noticed it, even if you didn't. Delilah's breath caught. Months? At least since summer, maybe longer. Martha gave her a knowing look. This wasn't a sudden decision on his part. He's been thinking about this for a while. That should have felt creepy, should have felt like she'd been stalked. Instead, Delilah felt something else, something she was afraid to name. Someone had been paying attention to her. Not with pity, like the rest of the town, not with judgment, with interest, with admiration, if his words were true. When was the last time anyone had looked at her and seen something other than a tragic figure to be pitied? There's something else you should know, Martha said carefully. People will talk about the speed of it, about the impropriety. Some will say you're desperate. Others will say he's taking advantage. Let them talk. The words came out harder than Delilah intended. They've been talking about me for 2 years. Poor Delilah. Sad Delilah. Struggling Delilah. I'm tired of being the town's object of pity. And if it doesn't work out, if he's not what he seems, Delilah met her friend's eyes. Then at least I'll have tried something other than slow starvation. Martha sighed. You've made up your mind already, haven't you? No. Delilah touched the ring around her neck again. But I'm close. After Martha left, promising to come back the next day, Delilah walked through her homestead in the fading light. She looked at it with new eyes, trying to see it the way Ephraim Cutter must have seen it. The garden was struggling, more weeds than vegetables now. The fence sagged in 3 places. The barn door hung askew on broken hinges. The chicken coop, what was left of it, listed to one side like a drunk. Everything Thomas and she had built was falling apart, and she didn't have the strength or resources to fix it, but Ephraim Cutter did. She stood in the middle of her yard as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful, in the way frontier sunsets always were, vast and lonely and indifferent to human struggle. Thomas had loved these sunsets. He used to stand right here, arm around her waist, and talk about the future, about the children they'd have, the bigger house they'd build, the prosperity that was just around the corner if they worked hard enough. He'd been wrong about the prosperity, but he'd been right about one thing. This land was worth fighting for. Delilah just wasn't sure she could keep fighting alone. She went inside as the first stars appeared, lit her one precious candle — she couldn't afford lamp oil anymore — and sat at the table with paper and pencil. She was going to make a list. Practical, logical. The kind of list Thomas would have made if he were the one making this decision. Reasons to say no. Don't know him. Town will gossip. Too soon after Thomas. What if he's cruel? What if I can't give him children? Her hand paused on that last one. The fear she hadn't voiced to Martha. 4 years with Thomas, and she'd never conceived. What if she was barren? What if Ephraim's hope for children was the one thing she couldn't give him? She forced herself to keep writing. Reasons to say yes. We'll survive the winter. Someone to share the work, security. He seems kind. He chose me. That last one surprised her. She stared at it for a long moment, wondering why she'd written it. But it was true, wasn't it? Ephraim Cutter could have had his pick of women. Young women. Pretty women. Women with dowries and families and futures. He'd chosen her instead. A worn-out widow with nothing but stubbornness and survival to her name. That had to mean something. Delilah looked at her two lists. The no column was longer, more logical, more sensible, but the yes column had one thing the other didn't: hope. She blew out the candle, unable to afford burning it any longer. Sat in the darkness of her kitchen, listening to the wind rattle the loose boards, feeling the cold seep through the walls. By morning, she'd made her decision. Ephraim Cutter returned 2 days later. Delilah saw him coming from a long way off this time. She was on the roof, despite her fear of heights, trying to patch one of the leaks before the next rain. She'd been up there for an hour, nailing down tar paper with shaking hands, when she saw the rider approaching. She knew it was him by the size, by the way he sat his horse, by the careful, deliberate pace, like he was giving her time to prepare. Delilah climbed down from the roof slowly, testing each rung of her rickety ladder. By the time she reached the ground, he was dismounting in her yard. He looked different in the daylight, less frightening somehow. His face was weathered but young. His eyes, she saw now, held tiny lines at the corners, like he smiled more than she'd given him credit for. His clothes were clean but old, mended in places. Working clothes, not town clothes. "Mrs. Marsh," he took off his hat. "I hope I'm not intruding." "You said I'd know where to find you," Delilah replied. "But you came to find me instead." "I got impatient." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Also, I was worried. That's a dangerous job for one person." He gestured at the roof. Delilah felt her cheeks heat. "The leak was getting worse. I couldn't wait any longer." "I could finish it for you if you'd like." He said it carefully, like he was afraid of overstepping. "No obligation. I'm already here, and it wouldn't take long." Delilah wanted to say no, wanted to maintain her independence. But her arms were shaking from the work, and she could see at least 3 more holes that needed patching. "All right," she said quietly. "Thank you." Ephraim nodded and went to get his tools from his saddlebag. Delilah watched him scale her ladder with the ease of a man who'd spent his life doing physical labor. The ladder, which had creaked alarmingly under her weight, seemed solid as stone beneath his. He worked quickly and competently. Within 30 minutes, he'd patched not just the holes she'd been working on, but 2 others she hadn't even noticed. When he came down, he tested the ladder's rungs. "This needs replacing," he said. "The 3rd rung is cracked nearly through." "I know." Delilah crossed her arms. "I've been meaning to fix it. I could make you a new one. Bring it next time I come to town." "Next time," she met his eyes. "You're assuming there will be a next time." Ephraim set down his tools and gave her his full attention. "Mrs. Marsh, I'm hoping there will be, but that's entirely up to you." They stood there in her yard, 2 people separated by 3 feet of dirt and a gulf of uncertainty. The wind picked up, scattering leaves around their feet. "Why me?" Delilah asked again. "Really, I need to understand." Ephraim was quiet for a moment, choosing his words. "Because strength matters more than youth. Because stubbornness is worth more than beauty. Because I'd rather have a partner who knows how to fight than a decoration who'll fold at the first sign of trouble." He stepped closer, just 1 step, and his voice dropped lower. "I've been alone a long time, Mrs. Marsh. I've had plenty of time to think about what I want in a wife. And what I want is someone real, someone who understands that life on the frontier isn't a romance story, someone who won't run when things get hard. And you think I'm that person. I know you are. I've watched you prove it every day for months." Delilah's throat felt tight. "What if I can't give you children? I was married 4 years before and never conceived." "Then we'll deal with that together." His answer came without hesitation. "I won't lie, I want children, but I want a partner more. And if God sees fit not to bless us with babies, we'll find other ways to make a life worth living." It was the right answer, maybe too right. Delilah found herself searching his face for signs of deception, for the crack in the facade that would reveal this was all too good to be true. But all she saw was honesty, and hope, and a loneliness that mirrored her own. 1 week, she heard herself say. Ephraim went very still. Ma'am? You said you wanted to marry me. If I agree, we do it within 1 week. She lifted her chin, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Winter's coming fast. If we're going to do this, there's no point in waiting. 1 week? He repeated it like he was testing the words. That's fast. Too fast? She felt a flutter of panic. Had she misread him? Was he already backing out? No. His face broke into the first real smile she'd seen from him, and it transformed him completely. He looked younger, happier, almost handsome, in a rough frontier way. No, ma'am. 1 week is perfect. He took a step closer, and Delilah found she didn't back away. But I need to know something first, Mrs. Marsh. Are you doing this because you want to, or because you feel like you have no other choice? The question caught her off guard. She'd expected him to just accept her answer, not question it. Does it matter? She asked. It matters to me. His pale blue eyes held hers. I don't want you to feel trapped. If you're only saying yes because you're desperate, we can find another way. There is no other way, Delilah interrupted. I am desperate, Mr. Cutter. I won't lie about that. Another winter alone will probably kill me. She paused, searching for the right words. But that's not the only reason I'm saying yes. What's the other reason? Because I think you're honest. I think you'll keep your word. And I think, she took a breath, I think maybe we could build something real. Not love, I can't promise that. But partnership, respect, maybe even friendship given time. That's enough. Ephraim's voice was rough with emotion, more than enough to start with. He extended his hand, not to touch her, just offering it, an invitation. Delilah looked at that huge, scarred hand, thought about Thomas's hands, which had been smaller, softer, thought about the years ahead, the unknown future, the leap of faith required to place her hand in a stranger's. She took it. His hand was warm despite the October cold, gentle, despite its size. He held her hand like it was something precious, something that might break if he squeezed too hard. 1 week from today, Ephraim said, if you'll have me. I'll have you, Delilah replied. God help us both. I was kneading bread when Mr. Ephraim came back that afternoon. I knew the moment he walked through the door that she'd said yes. His whole face had changed. The weight he'd been carrying for years, that crushing loneliness, had lifted just enough that he could breathe again. She said 1 week, he told me, still standing in the doorway, like he couldn't quite believe it. Ingrid, she said yes. I wiped flour from my hands and smiled. Of course she did. I told you she would. What do I do now? He sounded almost panicked. I have 7 days to... To what? Prepare? How do you prepare for a wife? You don't, I said practically. You just make sure the house is clean and the pantry's full. The rest will figure itself out. But even as I said it, I knew the next week would be chaos. Mr. Ephraim was the kind of man who, once he committed to something, threw himself into it completely. He'd want everything perfect for her arrival. The house spotless, the larder stocked, every detail attended to. I was right. For the next 6 days, that man worked like a demon. He cleaned every corner of the house, places that hadn't seen a rag in months, stocked the pantry with enough food to last through 2 winters, fixed the squeaky hinge on the bedroom door, carved a new set of wooden spoons because the old ones were worn, bought fabric in town for new curtains, even though I told him the old ones were fine, and every night he'd go into that spare room where he kept the unfinished cradle. I'd hear him in there carving by candlelight, working on something for children who didn't exist yet, hoping. On the 6th day, he rode to town and came back with a ring. Not gold, he couldn't afford that. And besides, her first husband's ring had been gold. This one was silver, delicate but strong, with tiny flowers etched into the band. Do you think she'll like it? He asked me, holding it up to catch the light. I think she'll like that you chose something different, I told him. Not trying to replace what she had, but offering something new. He nodded, satisfied, and put the ring in his pocket. That night, I found him on the porch, staring out at the mountains, at Eagle's Pass, where her first husband had died, where the woman he was about to marry had lost everything once before. What if I can't make her happy, he asked quietly. What if I'm not enough? Mr. Ephraim, I said, that woman doesn't need you to make her happy. She needs you to stand beside her while she learns to be happy again. There's a difference. He thought about that for a long time. Finally, he nodded. One more day, he said. One more day, and everything changes. He was right about that, though not quite in the way he expected, because marriages, even practical ones, have a way of becoming more complicated than anyone plans for. The morning of the wedding, Delilah woke in Martha Henley's guest room with her heart hammering like a drum. 7 days. She'd agreed to marry Ephraim Cutter in 7 days, and now those 7 days were gone. In 4 hours, she would stand before Reverend Morrison and promise to honor and obey a man she'd spoken to exactly twice. "You're awake." Martha appeared in the doorway with a breakfast tray. "I heard you moving around. Thought you might need sustenance." Delilah sat up, pulling the quilt around herself. Through the window, she could see the October sun rising over the prairie, painting everything gold. It was going to be a beautiful day, clear and cold. The kind of autumn morning that promised winter wasn't far behind. A good day for a wedding, or a terrible one, depending on how you looked at it. "I can't eat," Delilah said, eyeing the porridge and toast. "You can, and you will." Martha set the tray on the bedside table with a firm hand. "You're thin enough as it is. I won't have you fainting during your own ceremony because you're too nervous to eat." Delilah managed a few bites of toast, though it tasted like sawdust in her mouth. Her hands were shaking. She set down the toast and pressed her palms flat against the quilt, trying to steady them. "Having second thoughts?" Martha asked gently. "100th thoughts, more like." Delilah attempted a smile. "Is it too late to change my mind?" "Do you want to change it?" That was the question, wasn't it? Delilah had spent the past week in a strange fog of preparation, packing her few belongings, deciding what to take from the homestead and what to leave behind, accepting the charity of a borrowed dress from Martha because her own was too worn for a wedding. Through it all, one thought had circled her mind like a hawk. "This is really happening." "No," she said finally. "I don't want to change my mind. I'm just scared." "Good." Martha sat on the edge of the bed. "You should be scared. Marriage is terrifying even when you know the person. Marrying a stranger? That takes courage." She paused. "Or desperation. Sometimes both." "Which do you think this is?" Martha considered. "I think it started as desperation, but I saw how you looked when you talked about him the other day. There's something else there. Curiosity, maybe. Or hope." She took Delilah's hand. "He's been in town this week, you know, making arrangements." "I know. He came to the homestead 3 days ago." Delilah felt warmth rise in her cheeks at the memory. "To measure the furniture. He wanted to know what I wanted to bring to his house. And he was kind, patient. He didn't rush me or make me feel foolish for wanting to keep Thomas's rocking chair." Delilah's voice dropped. "He said he understood about holding on to memories, that he wouldn't ask me to forget my first husband just because I was marrying him." Martha squeezed her hand. "That's a good man talking, Delilah. Or a clever one saying what I need to hear. After 7 years of marriage, I can tell you, clever and good aren't mutually exclusive." Martha stood, smoothing her skirts. "Now finish that toast. We have a bride to dress." I wasn't at the wedding, of course. My place was at the mountain house, preparing for their arrival. But Mr. Ephraim told me about it later, and I heard the rest from folks in town. The church was more crowded than anyone expected. Word had spread, it always does in small towns, about the giant from the mountains marrying the widow Marsh. People came out of curiosity as much as goodwill. They wanted to see if the woman would actually go through with it, if she'd really stand beside a man who towered over her like a mountain over a creek. Some came hoping she would. Others came hoping she wouldn't, just for the scandal of it. Mr. Ephraim was waiting at the altar when she arrived. He'd borrowed a suit from Carl Henley, the only man in town big enough that the alterations didn't require a miracle. Even so, the sleeves were too short and the shoulders strained, but he'd combed his wheat gold hair and shaved careful, and when Mrs. Delilah walked down that aisle on Martha's arm, his face transformed. That's what Martha told me later. I've never seen a man look at a woman like that, Ingrid. Like she was the answer to a prayer he'd been too afraid to voice. Delilah wore Martha's blue wedding dress, let out, and taken in to fit her thinner frame. She carried a small bouquet of dried flowers, all anyone could find this late in the season. And around her neck, hidden beneath the collar, hung Thomas Marsh's ring on its chain. She was keeping him close, right up to the moment she gave herself to someone new. The ceremony started simply enough. Reverend Morrison, in his Sunday black, speaking the traditional words about the holy bond of matrimony. The congregation settled into their pews, watching with the focused attention people give to spectacles. Then came the complication. If anyone present knows of any lawful impediment to this marriage, Reverend Morrison intoned, speak now or forever hold your peace. The church door banged open. Everyone turned. There in the doorway stood Henry Walsh, drunk as a lord at 10 in the morning, swaying on his feet. I got an impediment, he shouted, words slurring. That giant killed a man 20 years ago. Ask him about Peter Grafton. Ask him why he's been hiding in the mountains. The church erupted. Gasps, whispers, people craning to see Mr. Ephraim's reaction. Mrs. Delilah went white as snow, but Mr. Ephraim just stood there, calm as stone. When the noise died down, he spoke in that deep, measured voice of his. Henry Walsh, you're drunk and you're wrong. I never killed anyone. What happened with Peter Grafton was an accident, and he'll tell you so himself if you ask him sober. He turned to Reverend Morrison. Can we continue? But, someone in the congregation started. No. Mrs. Delilah's voice cut through the murmuring like a knife. She turned to face the crowd, small but fierce. No. I don't care what happened 20 years ago. I don't care what stories you've told yourselves to explain why a good man chose to live alone. I care about the man standing beside me right now, the man who's shown me more kindness in 1 week than this town has shown me in 2 years. She looked at Henry Walsh, still swaying in the doorway. Get out. You're not welcome at my wedding. Carl Henley and 2 other men escorted Henry out. The man was muttering about how they'd all see, how the truth would come out eventually, but nobody was listening anymore. Mrs. Delilah turned back to Mr. Ephraim. Her hand found his, tiny in his massive palm, and held tight. Continue, she told Reverend Morrison, and just like that the congregation saw it, saw that this wasn't just a marriage of convenience, saw that this small widow with nothing to her name was choosing to defend her giant, to stand beside him against gossip and judgment and fear. The Reverend continued. Mr. Ephraim's hand was shaking when he slipped that silver ring onto her finger, but his voice was steady. I, Ephraim Cutter, take you, Delilah Marsh, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. When it was her turn, Mrs. Delilah's voice rang clear through the church. I, Delilah Marsh, take you, Ephraim Cutter, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. She meant it. You could hear it in her voice. This wasn't just words. This was a promise she intended to keep. You may kiss your bride. Mr. Ephraim bent down. He had to, the height difference was that great, and kissed her so gently you'd think she was made of glass. Just a soft press of lips, reverent and sweet. When they turned to face the congregation as man and wife, half the church was crying. The other half was already whispering about what Henry Walsh had said, about the giant's dark past, about whether this marriage would last the winter. But Mrs. Delilah didn't seem to care. She walked back down that aisle with her hand in her new husband's, chin high, daring anyone to say one word against him. That's when I knew. This marriage might have started as a business arrangement, but it wasn't going to stay that way for long. The reception was held in the church hall, sparse but respectable. Someone had brought cake. Someone else, coffee. The town's women had put together what they could on short notice, more out of duty than warmth. Delilah stood beside her new husband, that word still felt strange, and accepted congratulations from people who'd ignored her for 2 years. Their smiles were tight. Their words were careful. She could see the judgment in their eyes. The questions they were too polite to ask out loud. How desperate must she be? What does a giant want with a woman like her? Give it a month. She'll be running back to town, assuming she survives that long. Only Martha's congratulations felt genuine. She hugged Delilah tight and whispered, "You were magnificent. The way you stood up for him? That took spine. I meant what I said." Delilah pulled back, meeting her friend's eyes. "I don't care about old gossip. Whatever happened with Peter Grafton, it's not who Ephraim is now." "You called him Ephraim." Martha smiled. "First time I've heard you use his given name." Delilah felt heat rise in her cheeks. It was true. During the ceremony, saying Ephraim Cutter in her vows, it had felt less like marrying a stranger and more like claiming something. Someone. "He's my husband now," she said simply. "Seems wrong to keep calling him Mr. Cutter." Across the room, Ephraim was speaking with Carl Henley and Reverend Morrison. He looked uncomfortable in the borrowed suit, ill at ease with the attention. Every few minutes his eyes would find Delilah, like he needed to confirm she was still there, still real, still his. Each time their eyes met, something fluttered in Delilah's chest. Not love, she wasn't fool enough to call it that, but something, recognition maybe, or the beginning of trust. "Mrs. Cutter?" A woman's voice interrupted her thoughts. Delilah turned to find Mrs. Patterson, the boarding house owner, standing with a tight smile. "I wanted to wish you well, and to say," she leaned in, lowering her voice, "be careful, dear. A man that size, that strong, accidents happen." "If you're referring to what Henry Walsh said, I'm referring to common sense." Mrs. Patterson's smile didn't waver. "I've been running a boarding house for 20 years. I've seen all kinds of men. The quiet ones are often the most dangerous." Delilah felt anger flash through her. "Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Patterson, but I assure you I can take care of myself. Can you?" The older woman's eyes flicked to Ephraim, then back. "I hope so, dear, for your sake." She glided away, leaving Delilah shaking with suppressed rage. How dare she? How dare any of them stand there in their fine dresses and full pantries and judge a choice they'd never have to make? "Mrs. Cutter?" This time it was Ephraim, appearing at her elbow. "Are you all right? You look upset." "I'm fine." She forced her hands to unclench. "Just ready to leave, if that's acceptable." "More than acceptable." His voice was warm with relief. "I've been ready to leave since we arrived. Crowds make me nervous." That surprised a laugh out of her. This massive man, intimidated by a room full of farmers and shopkeepers, it was almost endearing. "Then let's go home," she said. Home. Not his house, not the mountain property. Home. Ephraim's face lit up like sunrise. "I'll get the wagon." The journey to Ephraim's house, their house, Delilah corrected herself, took 3 hours. The wagon was loaded with her belongings, pathetically few when you looked at them all together. A trunk of clothes, Thomas's rocking chair, a box of kitchen items, her mother's Bible. Everything she owned in the world fit in the back of one wagon with room to spare. Ephraim drove, hands steady on the reins. Delilah sat beside him, trying not to think about what came next. The wedding night, the expectations, the intimacy that would be required of her. Thomas had been gentle, but their marriage bed had never been passionate. Dutiful, pleasant enough, but not the earth-shaking experience she'd heard other women whisper about. And he'd been a normal-sized man. Ephraim was not. "You're thinking very loud," Ephraim said quietly. "I can practically hear the worry." Delilah felt herself flush. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "Don't apologize." He kept his eyes on the road, giving her the mercy of not looking at her. "I know this is awkward, uncomfortable. You're wondering what I'm going to expect tonight. If I'm going to be—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "Demanding. Are you?" "No. Simple. Direct." "Delilah. May I call you Delilah?" "You're my husband. You can call me whatever you like." "Delilah, then." Her name sounded different in his deep voice, almost pretty. "I need you to understand something. I didn't marry you to force myself on you. I married you because I want a partner, a companion, someone to build a life with." "But you want children." It wasn't a question. "I do, but there's no rush. We have time to get comfortable with each other first, to learn each other." He risked a glance at her. "I'm patient. I can wait until you're ready. And if I'm never ready, then we'll figure that out when we come to it." He turned his attention back to the horses. "I know what people think, that I'm some kind of brute who'll use his size to intimidate you into submission. But I'm not, Delilah. I'm just a man who's been lonely too long. I'll take whatever you're willing to give and be grateful for it." The sincerity in his voice made Delilah's throat tight. When had anyone last given her a choice? When had anyone put her comfort before their own needs? "Thank you," she said quietly. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking over the rough road. The landscape was changing as they climbed into the foothills. The flat prairie gave way to rolling hills dotted with pine and cottonwood. In the distance, the mountains rose like teeth against the sky. "There's Eagle's Pass," Ephraim said, pointing to a notch between two peaks. Delilah's chest tightened. "That's where Thomas died, where they'd found his frozen body 3 days after the blizzard." "I know it's hard," Ephraim said gently, "living this close to where you lost him. If it's too much, if you want to go back to town—" "No." Delilah's voice was firm. "No, I can't live in fear of the past. He died there, but I'm alive here. That has to mean something." Ephraim nodded slowly. "That's a brave way to look at it. It's the only way I know how." They climbed higher. The road became rougher, more isolated. Delilah began to understand why Ephraim had chosen this location. Up here you could go days without seeing another soul. Up here, a man who'd been judged and misunderstood could live in peace. "There," Ephraim said. And Delilah saw it. The house sat in a small valley, protected on 3 sides by forest. It was larger than she'd expected, not a cabin but a real house, built with care from honey-colored logs. A wide porch wrapped around 3 sides. Window boxes, empty now, showed where flowers had bloomed in warmer months. A barn stood nearby, solid and well-maintained. Beyond that, pastures where cattle grazed. It was beautiful, more than beautiful. It was a home. "You built all this?" Delilah asked, awed. "Every board." There was quiet pride in Ephraim's voice. "Took me 3 years, working when I could. I wanted it to be ready. For when I found—" He trailed off. "For when you found a wife. For when I found you." The certainty in those words sent a shiver through Delilah that had nothing to do with the cold. I was waiting on the porch when they arrived, drying my hands on my apron. I'd spent the morning in a frenzy of final preparations, making sure everything was perfect. Fresh linens on the bed, stew simmering on the stove. Fires lit in both the main room and bedroom to chase away the November chill. Mr. Ephraim helped Mrs. Delilah down from the wagon with careful hands, like she might break. She looked smaller than I'd imagined, standing beside him, thin and worn from hard years, but there was strength in her face, in the way she held herself. "Mrs. Cutter," I said, coming down the steps, "welcome home. I'm Ingrid Halverson. I cook and keep house for your husband." She blinked. "I didn't realize there was anyone else here. I have a small cabin out back," I explained. "Give you folks your privacy. But I'll be here during the days to help with meals and such, if that's acceptable to you." "More than acceptable." Relief flooded her face. "Thank you, Mrs. Halverson. Just Ingrid, please. We're going to be seeing a lot of each other." Mr. Ephraim started unloading the wagon. I led Mrs. Delilah inside, watching her take it all in. The main room with its stone fireplace and handmade furniture, the kitchen with a real stove, not just a hearth, the bedroom visible through an open door, dominated by the massive bed Mr. Ephraim had built to fit his frame. She stopped in the doorway of that bedroom, color rising in her cheeks. "I've put fresh linens on," I said quietly, "and there's hot water if you want to wash before supper. Thank you." Her voice was barely a whisper. I left her there and went to help Mr. Ephraim with the unloading. He was moving slow, giving her time to adjust. Smart man. "She's scared," I told him when we were out of earshot. "I know." He set down Thomas Marsh's rocking chair with careful reverence. "Did you prepare the spare room like I asked?" "I did. But Ephraim, I'll sleep there tonight. Give her space." I studied his face. "You told her that?" "I told her I'd be patient. I meant it." He glanced toward the house, where Mrs. Delilah was visible through the window, standing in the middle of the main room, looking lost. "She's given up everything to be here, Ingrid. Her home, her independence, her pride. The least I can do is give her time to adjust. You're a good man, I said. I'm a man who knows what it's like to be judged unfairly. I won't do that to her. We finished unloading in silence. When we came inside, Mrs. Delilah had composed herself. She was examining the kitchen with the focused attention of a woman cataloging her new domain. Supper's ready when you are, I told them. I'll leave you to settle in. Stay, Mrs. Delilah said quickly. Please, I'd like the company. So the three of us sat down to that first meal together, venison stew with fresh bread, better food than Mrs. Delilah had seen in months, judging by the way she tried not to eat too quickly. Mr. Ephraim watched her with those gentle eyes of his, not saying anything, just making sure her bowl stayed full. This is wonderful, Ingrid, Mrs. Delilah said. Thank you. You'll be doing the cooking yourself soon enough, I replied. Once you've settled in. I look forward to it. She meant it too. I could see it in her face, the relief of having a real kitchen again, of not having to make do with a broken stove and empty pantry. After supper, I excused myself, leaving them alone in the growing darkness. As I walked back to my cabin, I could see them through the window. Mr. Ephraim showing her around. Mrs. Delilah nodding, listening, trying to memorize everything. Two strangers in a house learning to be married. It was going to be a long winter. The first night was the hardest. Delilah stood in the bedroom, their bedroom, and tried not to panic. Ephraim was downstairs, banking the fires for the night. She could hear his footsteps, the creak of the floorboards under his weight. Any moment he would come up those stairs and then what? He'd said he'd be patient. But this was their wedding night. Surely there were expectations, obligations. The door opened. Delilah's heart jumped into her throat. Ephraim stood in the doorway, so tall he had to duck slightly to enter. He'd taken off his borrowed suit coat and stood in his shirt sleeves, looking uncertain. I want you to know, he said without preamble, I'm going to sleep in the spare room tonight. Delilah blinked. What? You've had a long day, a stressful day. You need rest, not, when he gestured vaguely, not obligations. But we're married. We are. And we'll have the rest of our lives to figure out what that means. He gave her a small smile. One night apart won't change anything. Relief and something else, disappointment, flooded through Delilah. Are you sure? I'm sure. He crossed to the dresser and pulled out a blanket. I'll be right down the hall if you need anything. Lock the door if it makes you feel safer. Ephraim, he paused in the doorway. Thank you, Delilah said quietly. No need for thanks. Sleep well, wife. He closed the door gently behind him. Delilah stood there for a long moment, staring at the space where he'd been. Then she looked at the massive bed, suddenly too large and too empty. She changed into her nightgown and crawled under the quilts. They smelled like pine and wood smoke and something else, something masculine and unfamiliar, Ephraim's scent. She was in his bed in his house, wearing his ring. She was married to a stranger who'd just given her the kindest gift anyone had in years, space to breathe. Delilah fell asleep more easily than she'd expected, one hand curled around Thomas's ring beneath her nightgown. Let me take you back for a moment, child. You need to understand what Mrs. Delilah was remembering that first night in a strange bed. Her marriage to Thomas Marsh hadn't been unhappy exactly, but it hadn't been the fairy tale young girls dream of either. Delilah was 22 when she married Thomas Marsh, and she thought she knew what love was. Thomas was handsome in a boyish way, with dark curls and an easy smile. He'd courted her properly, flowers from the field, walks after church, promises whispered in the moonlight. He was going to be a successful homesteader, he said. They'd have the finest farm in the territory. Children running through fields of wheat, prosperity and happiness forever. She'd believed him. Why wouldn't she? She was young and he was earnest, and neither of them understood yet how hard the frontier could be. Their wedding day had been joyful. The church filled with friends and family, her mother crying happy tears, Thomas's father clapping him on the back, welcoming Delilah into the family with rough affection. The wedding night had been awkward. Thomas was gentle but inexperienced. Delilah was nervous and unsure. They fumbled through it, both trying to pretend it was wonderful, both secretly relieved when it was over. It'll get better, Thomas had promised, holding her close. We just need practice. It did get better in time, not passionate. Delilah never felt the earth move the way romance novels described, but comfortable, pleasant. They found a rhythm that worked for them. The first year was hard but hopeful. The homestead required backbreaking work. Thomas was up before dawn, working until dark, trying to break the stubborn prairie soil. Delilah learned to cook over an open fire, to make soap from ashes, to stretch a dollar until it screamed. But they were together. They were building something. The second year, the crops failed. Not Thomas's fault. Everyone's crops failed that year. Too little rain, too much wind, grasshoppers that stripped the fields bare. Thomas took it hard, started talking about taking out a loan to try again next year with better seed. Maybe we should wait, Delilah suggested. Save up first. We can't wait, Thomas insisted. Every year we don't plant is a year we fall further behind. The third year, he took out the loan. From the bank, he said. Official and proper. The crops were better that year, but not good enough to pay back what he owed plus interest. Next year, Thomas promised. Next year will be the one. The fourth year started with hope. Thomas had a plan. Expand the planting, buy better equipment, make enough to pay off all their debts, and have money left over. Are you sure? Delilah asked, looking at the papers he wanted her to sign. Trust me, Thomas said, kissing her forehead. Have I ever steered us wrong? She signed, because she loved him, because she wanted to believe. That October, Thomas heard about a trading post near Eagles Pass that had supplies on sale. Good prices, he said. Too good to pass up. He'd go up before the first snow, buy what they needed for winter, be back in 2 days. Don't go, Delilah said, watching the gray sky. The weather looks bad. It's fine, just clouds. Thomas kissed her, confident as always. I'll be back before you know it. He wasn't. The blizzard hit that night. 3 days of howling wind and snow, so thick you couldn't see 3 feet in front of you. When it finally cleared, Thomas wasn't back. They found him on the 4th day, frozen solid, still in the saddle. The horse had tried to find its way home, but Thomas's grip on the reins had locked in death, pulling the animal off course. They'd both been lost in white nothing until the cold took Thomas and the horse finally broke free. In Thomas's saddlebag they found the supplies. Expensive supplies, purchased with money Delilah didn't know he had. Later, much later, she found the loan documents, not from the bank. From a private lender. Higher interest. Shorter terms. Money he'd never told her about, to buy equipment they didn't need, to chase a dream that was always 1 year away. Thomas had died trying to prove himself, and he'd left her with nothing but debts and a homestead she couldn't manage alone. She'd loved him. She still loved the memory of him, but she couldn't pretend any more that he'd been perfect, that their marriage had been everything she'd hoped. Thomas had been a dreamer who couldn't face reality, and in the end, that had killed him. You see now why Mrs. Delilah was so careful with Mr. Ephraim, why she needed to know he was practical, honest, someone who dealt in truth instead of pretty promises. She'd loved once with her whole heart. She wasn't sure she could do it again, but maybe, just maybe, she could learn to respect, to trust, to build something real instead of something beautiful but hollow. Delilah woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment she was disoriented, lost. This wasn't her bedroom. The ceiling was too high, the bed too soft, the morning light coming from the wrong direction. Then memory returned. Married. She was married. This was Ephraim's house, their house. She dressed quickly in her worn work dress and went downstairs. Ingrid was at the stove humming to herself. Ephraim sat at the table with a cup of coffee, reading a newspaper that must have been weeks old. He looked up when Delilah entered, and his face brightened. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" "I did, actually." Delilah accepted the cup of coffee Ingrid handed her. "Better than I have in months." "Good bed, that one." Ingrid cracked eggs into a pan. Mr. Ephraim made it special, extra soft mattress. "Planning ahead," Ephraim said, a hint of color in his cheeks. "Hoping I'd have someone to share it with eventually." They ate breakfast in a silence that wasn't quite comfortable, but wasn't entirely awkward either. Delilah found herself sneaking glances at Ephraim when she thought he wasn't looking, studying this man she'd married, He had good table manners, she noticed, ate carefully despite the size of his hands, thanked Ingrid for the food, kept his elbows off the table. Small things, but they mattered. After breakfast, Ephraim pushed back from the table. "I've got work in the barn. The cattle need tending before winter sets in properly." "Can I help?" Delilah asked before she could think better of it. Ephraim blinked. "You want to help with the cattle?" "I've worked cattle before. Thomas and I had 3 head before," she trailed off. "I'm not useless, despite how I might look." "I never thought you were useless." Ephraim's voice was gentle. "I just thought you might want to rest. Settle in." "I've been resting for 2 years," Delilah said with more bitterness than she intended, "trying to survive. I'd like to feel useful again." Understanding crossed Ephraim's face. "Then come on. I can always use the help." Working beside Ephraim, Delilah began to see the shape of the life he'd built. The barn was well organized, tools in their places, hay stored properly. He had 24 head of cattle, healthy and fat, 3 horses in addition to his stallion. Chickens in a coop that was actually secure, unlike her own had been. Everything showed the care of a man who took pride in his work. "You've done well for yourself," Delilah said, watching him fork hay into the feed trough. 3 years of hard work." Ephraim straightened, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold. "This land was cheap because nobody else wanted it, too far from town, too close to the mountains. But I didn't need town, I just needed space." "Space to hide?" The question came out before Delilah could stop it. Ephraim was quiet for a moment, then, "Space to breathe. There's a difference." "Because of what Henry Walsh said? About Peter Grafton? You want to know about that?" "I defended you without knowing the truth," Delilah said. "Maybe I should know what I was defending." Ephraim set down the pitchfork and leaned against the fence. "I was 19, working at the sawmill to save money for land. Peter Grafton was 17, showing off for his friends. He climbed up on the equipment while it was running, lost his balance, started to fall toward the blade." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Delilah could hear the old pain underneath. "I grabbed him, pulled him back. Saved his life," the witnesses said, "but I pulled too hard. Dislocated his shoulder, broke his arm in 2 places. You saved him." "I hurt him. That's what his father saw when he came running. His son screaming, me holding him, witnesses trying to explain. Peter's father," Ephraim's jaw tightened. He was drunk, angry, started a story that I'd attacked Peter out of jealousy, that I was dangerous, violent, couldn't control my strength. But there were witnesses, 3 of them. All said it was an accident, that I saved Peter's life. But the story was better than the truth, more interesting. And I was, he gestured at himself, different. Easy to believe the worst about someone who looks like me. Delilah felt anger kindle in her chest. That's not fair. No, but it's reality. Ephraim picked up the pitchfork again. Peter tried to tell the truth. His father beat him quiet. Eventually, I stopped fighting it. Left town, came here, built a life where I didn't have to explain myself. "Peter Grafton owes you," Delilah said fiercely. "He should have stood up for you. He was 17 and terrified of his father. I don't hold it against him." Ephraim gave her a sad smile. "I learned something valuable, Delilah. People believe what they want to believe. The truth is less important than the story they've already decided on. I believe you. You didn't even know me when you defended me." "No," Delilah agreed. "But I knew I'd spent 2 years watching this town judge me for surviving, for not being tragic enough or grateful enough or broken enough. I wasn't going to stand there and watch them judge you too." Ephraim looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the barn and pulled her into his arms. Not romantic, not sexual. Just a hug, a thank you without words. Delilah stiffened at first, not used to being held. Then slowly, carefully, she let herself relax into it. Let herself feel the warmth of another human being, the comfort of not being alone. They stood like that for several heartbeats. Then Ephraim released her, stepping back to a proper distance. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for believing me. Thank you for telling me the truth." They went back to work, but something had shifted. The silence between them was easier now, less filled with uncertainty and more with the beginning of understanding. That night, Ephraim slept in the spare room again, and the night after that, and the night after that. A week passed, then 2. The routine of the household settled into a pattern. Ephraim would work outside during the day, tending cattle, repairing fences, preparing for winter. Delilah would help where she could and learn the rhythms of the kitchen from Ingrid. They'd eat supper together, all three of them, conversation growing easier each night. Then Ephraim would go to the spare room, and Delilah would climb into the big bed alone. It should have been a relief. It was what she'd wanted. Time to adjust, space to breathe. But as the days passed, Delilah found herself feeling cheated somehow. They were married, but they weren't truly husband and wife. They were housemates, polite strangers sharing space, and she was starting to want more. The realization came on a gray November morning when she woke to find ice on the inside of the windows. Winter was setting in for real now. The world was contracting, leaving just the three of them isolated on the mountain. Delilah went downstairs to find Ephraim already up, stoking the fire. He was in his undershirt, suspenders hanging loose, hair mussed from sleep. There was something intimate about seeing him like this, unguarded, real. "Morning," he said, not looking up from the fire. "Ingrid's not here yet. Ice on the path from her cabin." "I can make coffee," Delilah offered. "I'd appreciate it." They moved around the kitchen in careful choreography, not touching, but always aware of each other. Delilah measured coffee. Ephraim sliced bread. She filled the kettle. He set the table. Married people doing married things, except they weren't, not really. "Ephraim?" Delilah's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Hmm? Why are you still sleeping in the spare room?" His hands stilled on the bread knife. "Because I said I'd be patient. Give you time. It's been 2 weeks." "I know." He set down the knife and turned to face her. "Are you saying you want me to stop? That you're ready for—" He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Delilah's heart was hammering. Was she ready? She didn't know. But she knew the current situation couldn't continue. They needed to move forward or admit this marriage was a sham. "I'm saying we're married," she said carefully, "and I'd like to start acting like it." "Acting like it," Ephraim repeated. "Delilah, I don't want you to feel obligated. I don't." She met his eyes. "I feel curious. We're building something here, you and I, a partnership, but there's a piece missing, and I think we both know what it is." Ephraim crossed the kitchen slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wanted. When he reached her, he took her hands in his, so gentle, always so gentle. "If we do this," he said quietly, "we do it right, not as an obligation, as a choice we're both making." "I'm choosing," Delilah said. "Tonight, then." His voice was rough with emotion. "Tonight, we'll be properly married." I knew something had changed when I arrived that morning. The two of them were sitting at the kitchen table, hands almost but not quite touching, looking at each other with a new awareness. The air between them felt charged somehow, electric. "Morning, Ingrid," Mr. Ephraim said, but he didn't look away from Mrs. Delilah. "Morning," I replied, hiding my smile. About time those two figured out they were married. I busied myself with breakfast preparations while they sat there, silent, but together. Every so often their hands would brush, and both would jump like they'd been burned. Young love, or not quite love. Whatever it was better than the careful distance they'd been maintaining. After breakfast, Mr. Ephraim went to work looking like a man with a mission. Mrs. Delilah stayed inside, nervous energy making her clean things that didn't need cleaning. "You don't have to be scared," I told her when we were alone. She startled. "I'm not—" "Yes, you are. And that's natural. But let me tell you something about that man." I nodded toward the window where Mr. Ephraim was visible, working with the horses. "He's been alone for 3 years. Wanted a wife for longer than that. You think he's going to rush this? Going to be anything less than careful with you?" "But what if I can't?" Mrs. Delilah's voice dropped. "Thomas and I tried for 4 years. What if I'm barren?" "Then you're barren, and you'll deal with it together." I wiped my hands on my apron. "But you won't know unless you try. And even if children never come, a marriage is more than just baby-making." "Is it?" She looked at me with those haunted eyes. "Isn't that what he wants most? He said so himself." "He wants a family, yes, but he chose you specifically, a woman who might not be able to give him children. He knew the risk when he proposed. I softened my voice, give him a chance to prove he meant what he said, that you're enough, with or without babies. She thought about that for the rest of the day, I could tell, turning it over in her mind, testing it for truth. When evening came, I made myself scarce early, left them to their supper alone, went back to my cabin, and pretended not to see the lamplight in that big bedroom window staying lit long into the night. November deepened into December. The first real snow came, blanketing the mountain in white silence. Delilah and Ephraim's marriage entered a new phase. They shared a bed now, though it had taken several nights before they were fully comfortable with each other. Ephraim had been patient, gentle, teaching her things Thomas had never known, showing her that intimacy could be more than duty, could actually be pleasurable. But they were still finding their way, still learning to be married instead of just acting like it. The morning routines became familiar. Ephraim would wake first, stoke the fires, get coffee started. Delilah would wake to the smell of it, dress quickly in the cold, come downstairs to find him already at the table with his newspaper. "Morning," he'd say, the same every day. "Morning," she'd reply, accepting the coffee he'd poured for her. They'd eat breakfast in silence, not uncomfortable anymore, just quiet. Then Ephraim would head to the barn and Delilah would help Ingrid with the housework. They were settling into the rhythm of marriage, but something was still missing. Some spark that would transform them from housemates who happened to share a bed into genuine partners. The change came on a December morning when everything went wrong. Delilah woke to chaos, shouting from outside, the panicked lowing of cattle. Ephraim's voice, urgent and commanding. She threw on clothes and ran outside in her bare feet into ankle-deep snow. The barn fence had collapsed in the night, not just a board or two. The entire eastern section, brought down by the weight of heavy snow, and the cattle, foolish creatures, had wandered out and were now scattered across the hillside. Ephraim was trying to round them up alone, running through snow in his shirt sleeves, voice hoarse from shouting. But for every cow he drove back toward the barn, 2 more would wander off. Delilah didn't think. She ran for the barn, grabbed a rope, and waded into the snow. "What are you doing?" Ephraim shouted when he saw her. "Get back inside, you'll freeze." "So will you," Delilah snapped back. "Now shut up and tell me what to do." For a moment, he just stared at her. Then a grin split his face. "Left flank, head off those 3 heifers before they reach the tree line." They worked together for the next 2 hours. Delilah's feet went numb. Her hands turned blue. Snow soaked through her dress and petticoat, making every movement heavy. But she kept going, matching Ephraim's determination with her own stubborn will. Finally, they got the last cow back into the barn. Ephraim secured the broken fence with rope. It would need proper repair, but this would hold for now. Then he turned to Delilah. She was shaking violently. Her lips had gone purple. Ice clung to her hair and eyelashes. "Inside," Ephraim said, voice brooking no argument. "Now." He half-carried her to the house. Ingrid took one look and sprang into action, stoking the fire higher, putting kettles on to boil, pulling every quilt and blanket from the shelves. "Strip," Ephraim ordered. "What?" "Strip. Those wet clothes will kill you faster than the cold." When she hesitated, he turned his back. "I won't look, but you need dry clothes, and you need them now." Delilah's fingers were too numb to work the buttons. After a moment of fumbling, she gave up. "I can't. My hands won't." Ephraim turned back, eyes carefully averted from anything but her face. "May I help?" She nodded, teeth chattering too hard to speak. His huge hands worked the buttons with surprising delicacy, peeled the frozen fabric from her skin, wrapped her in blankets while Ingrid ran for a dry nightgown. They got her into the nightgown, then into a chair pulled close to the fire. Ephraim wrapped more blankets around her, rubbing her hands between his to restore circulation. "Stupid," he muttered. "So stupid. You could have died." "But I didn't." Delilah's words were slurred from the cold. "We saved the cattle. Damn the cattle. You're more important than any cow." The vehemence in his voice made her look up. His face was twisted with something that looked like fear. Raw, genuine terror. "Ephraim, promise me." He gripped her hands tighter. Promise me you'll never do something that reckless again. I can't lose you, Delilah. I just found you." Something warm bloomed in Delilah's chest that had nothing to do with the fire. He was afraid. For her. This giant of a man was shaking because the thought of losing her frightened him. "I promise," she said softly, "but only if you promise the same. No more running around in blizzards without a coat." A surprised laugh burst from him. "Fair enough." Ingrid appeared with hot tea laced with honey and whiskey. "Drink this, both of you." They sat by the fire wrapped in blankets, sipping tea while sensation slowly returned to Delilah's extremities. Ephraim wouldn't let go of her hand, kept checking her fingers, her toes, making sure everything was warming properly. "You were amazing out there," he said after a while. "Most women would have stayed inside." "I'm not most women." "No." His voice was warm. "No, you're not. You're remarkable, Delilah Cutter." Cutter, her married name. She'd been Mrs. Cutter for 6 weeks now, but this was the first time it felt truly real. "So are you," she said. "Ephraim Cutter." They smiled at each other, and for the first time since their wedding night, Delilah felt something deeper than gratitude or obligation. Something that might, given time, grow into affection. Maybe even love. That evening, after supper, Delilah was helping Ingrid with the dishes when she noticed something, a familiar cramping in her lower belly, a dampness that made her heart sink. Her monthly courses, right on schedule. No pregnancy. She excused herself quickly, went to the bedroom and confirmed it, blood on her undergarments. Proof that her body had failed once again to conceive. Delilah sat on the edge of the bed, hands pressed to her face. She'd known it was unlikely. 6 weeks wasn't long. Some women tried for years. But Ephraim had been so hopeful, so certain that by winter she'd be carrying his child. And she'd failed him. When she came back downstairs, Ephraim took one look at her face and knew. His expression shifted just for a moment, from hope to disappointment. Then he smoothed it away, schooled his features into neutrality. "It's all right," he said quietly. "It's early yet. These things take time." "I know." Delilah couldn't meet his eyes. "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize for your body." He came to her, tilted her chin up gently. "We'll keep trying. No pressure. No timelines. It'll happen when it happens." "And if it never happens?" "Then we'll still have each other. That's enough." He said the right words, kind words, but Delilah could see the shadow of disappointment in his eyes. The dream deferred. That night she lay in bed beside him, listening to his breathing slow into sleep. Her hand crept to her flat belly. Empty. Barren. She'd failed Thomas in this. 4 years of trying, never conceiving. Now she was failing Ephraim too. What if I can never give him what he wants most? The thought kept her awake long after Ephraim's breathing had deepened into snores. Let me tell you about the promise that was weighing on Mr. Ephraim, child, the one Mrs. Delilah didn't know about yet. The one that made every month without a baby feel like breaking a vow. Ephraim Cutter was 22 years old when his father died. It happened in a logging camp in Minnesota where the Cutter men had worked for 3 generations. A massive oak fell wrong, crushing Jorgen Cutter's chest before anyone could shout a warning. They carried him back to camp, but everyone knew it was hopeless. Crushed ribs, blood in his lungs, the kind of injury a man didn't survive. Ephraim knelt beside his father's cot, holding one massive hand in both of his. Even dying, Jorgen Cutter was enormous, 7 feet tall in his prime, shoulders like an ox, hands that could split logs bare-handed. He'd passed that size down to his only son. "Ephraim," Jorgen's voice was wet, bubbling. "Listen to me." "Don't talk, Papa. Save your strength." "For what?" A terrible laugh that ended in coughing. "I'm dying, boy. Let me say what needs saying." He fumbled in his vest pocket with his free hand, pulled out a gold watch, the one that had belonged to his father and his father's father, all the way back to Norway. "You know what this is?" "Grandfather's watch." "It's more than that." Jorgen pressed it into Ephraim's hand. "It's proof that we existed, that we mattered. Every man who carried this watch, from the old country to here, they all had one thing in common. They didn't quit. They kept going. They built something." "Papa," You're the last one. Jorgen gripped Ephraim's hand tighter. Your grandfather had one son, I had one son. The cutter line is down to you, boy, just you. Ephraim's throat tightened. He'd always known he was an only child, but he'd never thought about it in those terms, the last of his line. You're young still, Jorgen continued. You got time, but you need to promise me something. Anything. Find a good woman, not just pretty, good, strong. Someone who'll give you sons to carry this watch after you're gone. Jorgen's eyes were desperate now. Don't let the line die with you. Don't let all those generations, all that struggle, all that crossing oceans and building new lives, don't let it be for nothing. I promise, Papa. Ephraim was crying now. I promise I'll make you proud. I'll find a wife, have children. The line won't end with me. Good boy. Jorgen smiled, blood on his teeth. Good boy. Now help me up. I want to die on my feet, not in a bed like some invalid. Ephraim helped his father stand. It took all his strength. Jorgen was a big man, even broken, but he managed it. Held his father upright while the light faded from those pale blue eyes. Jorgen Cutter died standing, his son holding him up, his father's watch clutched in Ephraim's fist. That promise haunted Mr. Ephraim for 12 years. He watched other men marry, have children, build families. He watched the cutter line dwindle down to just him, alone in the wilderness, growing older with no one to pass the watch to. By the time he was 34, that promise had become a weight so heavy it was crushing him. That's why he needed children so desperately. Not just because he wanted them, though he did, but because he'd made a dying promise to his father. A promise that was eating him alive every day he failed to fulfill it. And now his wife, his good, strong wife, was lying beside him, thinking she was failing him, when really he was terrified he was failing everyone who'd ever carried that watch. The next morning, Delilah found Ephraim in the barn, working on repairing the fence that had collapsed. He attacked the work with a ferocity that spoke of frustration. Ephraim? He didn't stop hammering. Yeah? Are you angry with me? That made him stop. He set down the hammer and turned to face her. What, no. Why would you think that? Because I'm not pregnant. Because I disappointed you. Delilah, he crossed to her, took her cold hands in his. You didn't disappoint me. I disappointed myself by hoping too much too soon. That's on me, not you. But you want children so badly. I do. He said it simply. I won't lie about that. But I want you more. And if children never come, I'll learn to live with it. Will you, really? Delilah searched his face. Or will you spend the rest of our lives resenting me for something I can't control? Ephraim was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, he said finally, and the honesty hurt worse than a lie would have. I hope not, I think not, but I can't promise you I won't have moments of sadness, of wondering what might have been. At least you're honest. I promised you honesty when we married. I won't break that promise, even when the truth is hard. He squeezed her hands. But Delilah, I also promised you patience, and I meant that too. We've been trying for 6 weeks. That's nothing. Some couples try for years before it happens. And some never succeed at all. Then we'll be one of those couples, and we'll make the best of it. He pulled her into his arms. You're not a broodmare, Delilah. You're my wife, my partner. That matters more than any baby. She wanted to believe him, wanted so desperately to trust that he meant it. But she could feel the tension in his body, could sense the disappointment he was trying so hard to hide, and she knew deep in her heart that this was going to be a longer winter than either of them expected. December was settling in properly now. The snow was 3 feet deep in places. The mountain was isolated, cut off from town except for the most desperate journeys. Inside the house, Mr. Ephraim and Mrs. Delilah were learning what it meant to be married. Learning to navigate disappointment and hope, honesty and kindness, the space between wanting something and accepting what is. But outside, in the town they'd left behind, wheels were turning, plans were being made. A man with cold gray eyes was looking at land records and debt documents, calculating how long it would take before the widow's new husband had something worth taking. Winter was here, but the real cold was still coming. January came in bitter and unforgiving. The mountain was buried under snow so deep that some mornings Ephraim had to dig a path from the house to the barn just to tend the animals. Delilah would watch from the window, seeing only the top of his head visible above the white walls he carved through the drifts. They were isolated completely now. No trips to town, no visitors except the occasional wolf howling in the distance. Just the three of them, Ephraim, Delilah, and Ingrid, trapped together in a world of white silence. It should have drawn them closer. Instead, the isolation seemed to magnify every small tension. Delilah's courses came again in early January, and again in early February. Each time Ephraim's face would do that thing, that brief flash of disappointment before he masked it with understanding. Each time Delilah would retreat into herself a little more, the weight of failure pressing down on her chest. 3 months married, 3 months of trying. Nothing. "It's normal," Ingrid told her one February morning as they kneaded bread together. "3 months is nothing, Mrs. Delilah. Some women I've known tried for a year or more before conceiving, and some never conceive at all." Delilah punched the dough harder than necessary. "What if I'm one of those women? What if Thomas and I never had children because something is wrong with me? Or something was wrong with him. Takes two to make a baby. Ephraim is fine. He's strong, healthy, descended from a line of giants who clearly had no trouble producing sons." Delilah shaped the dough viciously. "The problem is me. It has to be." Ingrid was quiet for a moment, then, "You know he's been carving again." "What?" "In the spare room. That cradle he started years ago. He's working on it most nights after you've gone to sleep." Ingrid's voice was gentle. "He sits in there and carves, hoping." Delilah felt something crack inside her chest. "He shouldn't. He's just going to disappoint himself. Maybe. Or maybe hope is all that keeps us going through winter." Ingrid covered her dough and set it to rise. "My mama used to say that hoping is like breathing. You can't stop doing it just because the air is cold." "Your mama sounds like she was an optimist." "She was a realist who understood that giving up hope is the same as giving up living." Ingrid wiped flour from her hands. "Don't give up yet, child. It's too soon." But it didn't feel too soon. It felt like forever. Each month stretched longer than the last, each disappointment heavier than the one before. The tension came to a head on a gray afternoon in late February. Delilah was mending clothes by the fire when Ephraim came in from the barn, stamping snow from his boots. He looked tired. More than tired. Worn down in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. "Coffee?" Delilah offered. "Please." She poured him a cup, noting how he wrapped his huge hands around it like he was trying to absorb its warmth. They sat in silence, the only sound the crackle of the fire and the wind howling outside. "Delilah," Ephraim said finally, "I've been thinking." Something in his tone made her chest tighten. "About what?" "About seeing a doctor. When the pass is clear enough to get to town. To find out if there's a reason you're not conceiving." The words hit her like a slap. "You want me examined? Like livestock?" "That's not what I meant." "Isn't it?" Delilah set down her mending with shaking hands. "You want to know what's broken. What's defective about the wife you purchased." "I didn't purchase you." Ephraim's voice was tight. "We made an agreement. A partnership. A partnership that comes with expectations. Children, you said. By winter, you'd have your son growing inside me." Delilah felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back angrily. "Well, it's winter and I'm empty and I'm sorry I'm failing you, but I can't." "Don't." Ephraim stood abruptly, chair scraping across the floor. "Don't apologize for something you can't control. Then don't ask me to be examined like there's something wrong with me. I'm trying to help." His voice rose for the first time since she'd known him. "I'm trying to find a solution because watching you blame yourself every month is killing me, Delilah. It's killing both of us." "But then maybe you should have married someone else." The words burst out before she could stop them. "Someone young and fertile who could give you a dozen sons without any trouble." Ephraim went very still. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. "Is that what you think? That I'm regretting marrying you? Aren't you? No?" He crossed to her in 2 strides, grabbed her shoulders, not roughly, but firmly. "No, I chose you, Delilah, not some faceless young woman. You. And I don't regret it. Not for one single moment. Even though I can't give you what you want most, You already gave me what I want most. His grip gentlened. You gave me a partner. Someone to talk to in the evenings. Someone who doesn't flinch away from me. Someone who stood up for me in front of the whole town when you barely knew me. But the children would be a blessing. But you're not a failure without them. He pulled her closer, rested his forehead against hers. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I made you feel like you weren't enough. You're more than enough, Delilah, with or without babies. She wanted to believe him, but the doubt had already planted itself deep in her heart. I'm tired, she said quietly. I think I'll lie down for a while. Ephraim released her, stepped back. Delilah, I just need some time alone, please. She climbed the stairs without looking back, feeling his eyes on her the whole way. Once in the bedroom, she closed the door and sank onto the bed, pressing her hands to her face. This was what she'd feared, that their practical arrangement would crack under the weight of real expectations, that she'd disappoint him, that he'd come to resent her. And now it was happening, just like she'd known it would. I found Mr. Ephraim in the barn an hour later, mucking out stalls with violent efficiency. You had a fight, I said, not a question. We had a disagreement. He threw another shovelful of soiled hay into the wheelbarrow, about seeing a doctor. You pushed too hard. I was trying to help. He stopped, leaned on the shovel. She thinks she's failing me, Ingrid. Every month I see it eating at her. I thought if we knew for certain one way or another, you thought having a doctor confirm she's barren would make her feel better? I shook my head. Mr. Ephraim, for a smart man you can be powerfully stupid sometimes. He flinched. What was I supposed to do, watch her torture herself? You were supposed to let it be, let time do its work. Pushing her to be examined just confirms what she already fears, that you think something's wrong with her. But I don't. Doesn't matter what you think. Matters what she heard. I softened my voice. You told her she's enough. Do you mean that? Of course I do. Then prove it. Stop hovering over her monthly cycles like a farmer checking if his mare's in foal. Stop working on that cradle every night where she can hear you. Stop making her feel like her worth is tied to her womb. Ephraim sank down onto a hay bale, head in his hands. I don't know how to stop wanting it, Ingrid. It's all I've thought about for years, having a family, keeping the promise I made to my father. Then you need to choose, I said bluntly, the promise to your dead father or the promise you made to your living wife. Because right now you're trying to keep both and it's tearing you apart. That's not fair. Life rarely is. I sat beside him. Listen to me. That woman upstairs chose you when she had every reason to say no. She's defended you, stood by you, given you more than you had any right to hope for. Are you really going to risk losing her over something neither of you can control? He was quiet for a long time. No, he said finally. No, I'm not. Good. Then go apologize, and mean it. Delilah was still in the bedroom when Ephraim knocked softly on the door. Can I come in? She didn't answer, but she didn't tell him no either. He took that as permission and entered, closing the door gently behind him. I'm sorry, he said without preamble. You were right. I was treating you like livestock, like your only value is in producing children. Delilah sat up, surprised by the direct apology. Ephraim, no, let me finish. He crossed to sit on the edge of the bed, careful to leave space between them. I've been so focused on the family I wanted to build that I forgot to appreciate the family I already have. You and me. That's already a family, Delilah. Already something worth protecting. But your father's promise. My father's dead. The words were harsh, but his voice was gentle. And I'm alive, married to you, and I need to live for what is, not what might be. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. The gold watch Delilah had seen him carry, the one he said belonged to his grandfather. This watch has been passed down for 4 generations, Ephraim said, turning it over in his large hands. Every man who carried it felt the weight of it, the obligation to continue the line, to have sons to pass it to. He held it out to Delilah. I want you to have it. What? No, I can't. Yes, you can because you're my family now, the most important person in my life. And if we never have children to pass it to, then it stays with you. Proof that our marriage mattered, that we mattered. Delilah took the watch with trembling hands. It was heavier than she expected, warm from his pocket. Are you sure? I'm sure. He covered her hands with his. I don't want you to feel like you're failing me anymore. I don't want every month to be a disappointment. I just want us to be together, to build whatever life we can. Children or no children. But what if I can never? Then we'll find other ways to leave a legacy. Maybe we'll take in orphans. Maybe we'll be the aunt and uncle every kid in the county comes to for advice. Maybe we'll just live a good life together, and that will be enough. He squeezed her hands. I married you for you, Delilah, not for your womb, and I need you to believe that. This time, when the tears came, Delilah let them fall. Let herself cry for all the pressure she'd been putting on herself, all the fear that she wasn't enough. Ephraim pulled her into his arms and held her while she sobbed. Didn't try to fix it or make it better. Just held her and let her feel what she needed to feel. I'm scared, she whispered against his chest. Me too, but we'll be scared together. That night, they made love differently than they had before. Not trying to make a baby, not following a calendar or counting days. Just two people choosing to be close, to comfort each other, to remind themselves why they'd made this leap of faith in the first place. Afterward, lying in the darkness, Delilah felt something ease in her chest. The watch sat on the bedside table, catching moonlight through the window, a symbol of old promises giving way to new ones. Ephraim? Thank you for choosing me. Always, he murmured, already half asleep. Every day I choose you. Delilah closed her eyes and let herself believe it. March came with the first hints of thaw. The snow began to melt, turning the world into a mess of mud and slush. The isolation of winter started to break. The passes would be clear soon. They could get to town again. Delilah's courses came in early March, but this time the disappointment was tempered with acceptance. Ephraim held her that night without saying anything about doctors or examinations or timelines, just held her and let it be. They were finding a new rhythm, a better one, learning to be married not in spite of the children they didn't have, but because of the partnership they did. It should have been the beginning of something better. Instead, it was the calm before the storm. The rider came on a morning in late March when the snow had mostly melted, and the first brave crocuses were pushing up through the mud. Delilah saw him from the kitchen window, a man on horseback picking his way carefully up the muddy road. She felt her stomach clench. They never had visitors. The isolation of the mountain property ensured that. Ephraim, she called. Someone's coming. He appeared from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. Together they waited on the porch as the rider approached. It was Samuel Morrison, the banker from town. Delilah's heart sank. Bankers didn't make house calls to deliver good news. Mr. Cutter, Mrs. Cutter. Morrison tipped his hat as he dismounted. He looked uncomfortable, like a man bearing a message he didn't want to deliver. I apologize for the intrusion. There's a matter that requires your immediate attention. What kind of matter? Ephraim's voice was wary. Morrison pulled a manila envelope from his saddlebag. I'm afraid there's been a claim filed against you, a debt allegedly owed by the late Thomas Marsh, as Mrs. Cutter was his widow and is now your wife. The debt transfers to your household under territorial law. The words seemed to come from very far away. Delilah felt the world tilt beneath her feet. That's impossible, she said. Thomas's debts were settled after he died. I lost the homestead to the bank, but everything was paid. This debt wasn't recorded with the bank, ma'am. It was a private loan from a Mr. Jonathan Blackwood of Rapid City. He's come forward with documentation proving that your late husband borrowed $1,000 6 months before his death. $1,000. The number echoed in Delilah's head like a death knell. Let me see that. Ephraim took the envelope, pulled out the papers. His face darkened as he read. This says Thomas borrowed money to purchase equipment and seed. Delilah, did you know about this? No? Her voice was barely a whisper. No, he never mentioned anyone named Blackwood. Never said anything about a loan from Rapid City. The documentation appears legitimate, Morrison said apologetically. Thomas's signature, 2 witnesses, proper legal language. Mr. Blackwood has been attempting to collect through proper channels, but given the complexity of the situation, your remarriage, the property transfer, he's now filed a formal claim. A claim for what? Ephraim's voice was tight. For the full amount owed plus 3 years of accumulated interest. Total of $1,047. Morrison's face was grim. Payable within 30 days, or he has the right to claim assets equivalent to the debt's value. What assets? But Delilah already knew the answer. Her stomach turned to ice. This property, Mr. Cutter, your land, your home, your livestock. Mr. Blackwood has had them assessed. The total value is approximately $1,200, which would satisfy the debt with a small credit remaining. Silence. The wind whispered through the pine trees, carrying the scent of melting snow and mud. Somewhere a bird was singing, oblivious to the disaster unfolding on this porch. "Let me understand this," Ephraim said, his voice dangerously calm. "A man I've never met is claiming my wife's dead husband owed him money. And because I married her, I'm now responsible for this debt. And if I can't pay within 30 days, he takes everything I've built." In essence, yes. Morrison looked miserable. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cutter. I know this seems unjust, but the law is clear. A widow's debts transfer to her new husband upon remarriage." Delilah couldn't breathe. This was her fault. Thomas's secret debt, another one she'd never known about, was going to destroy Ephraim, was going to take everything he'd worked for. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Ephraim, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "I know you didn't." His hand found hers, gripped tight. "This isn't your fault." "Is there any way to dispute the claim?" Delilah asked Morrison desperately. "To prove the debt is fraudulent?" "Do you have evidence that it's fraudulent?" "No, but—" She stopped. What evidence did she have? She hadn't known about the loan, but that didn't mean it didn't exist. Thomas had kept secrets before. The bank loans, the equipment purchases. Why not this too? Morrison's expression was sympathetic, but firm. "Without evidence of fraud, the debt stands, Mr. Blackwood has proper documentation. I've examined it myself. The signature appears genuine." "Then we'll pay it," Ephraim said. "Ephraim, no. We'll pay it," he repeated. "I have money saved. Not $1,000, but some. I'll sell the cattle. That should bring enough to satisfy the debt." "The cattle are your livelihood," Morrison said quietly. Without them, I'll still have my land and my wife. That's what matters." Ephraim's jaw was set. "How long do I have?" 30 days from today. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cutter. If there was anything I could do, you've done what you had to. Thank you for bringing this personally instead of sending a deputy." Morrison nodded, clearly relieved to have the conversation over. He mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Delilah and Ephraim standing on the porch like survivors of a natural disaster. "Ephraim," Delilah said, her voice breaking, "you can't sell the cattle. That's your future. Your security." "My future is you." He turned to face her, his expression fierce. "Everything else is just things, Delilah. Houses can be rebuilt, cattle can be replaced, but I'll be damned if I let some creditor take you from me." "He's not trying to take me, isn't he? If we lose this house, where do we go? Back to town? Back to you struggling alone while people whisper about how the giant couldn't even protect his own wife?" Ephraim shook his head. "No. We pay the debt, we keep our home. We figure out the rest together." He pulled her into his arms, and Delilah clung to him, feeling like she was drowning. Everything was falling apart. The partnership they'd built, the security she'd finally found, it was all crumbling because of secrets Thomas had kept. Because of her past, her choices, her dead husband's debts. "I'm so sorry," she whispered into Ephraim's chest. "Stop apologizing. This isn't your fault." But his voice was tight, and she could feel the tension in his body, the anger he was trying so hard to contain. Not anger at her, she realized. Anger at the situation, at Thomas for leaving this mess behind, at the universe for taking away what they'd just started to build. That night, Ephraim went to the barn and didn't come back for hours. Delilah watched from the window, seeing him work in the lamplight, preparing the cattle for sale, doing what needed to be done, destroying his livelihood to pay for her dead husband's mistakes. When he finally came to bed, he held her without speaking, but Delilah could feel the distance between them. Not physical, but emotional, a gulf opening up that she didn't know how to cross. Everything was changing again. And this time, she wasn't sure their marriage was strong enough to survive it. Now, child, I need to take you back to understand how deep this betrayal ran. Back to a February morning 3 years earlier, when Thomas Marsh made a choice that would echo forward into his widow's future. The trading post at Eagles Pass was a rough place, little more than a cabin with supplies, run by a man named Jebediah Holt, who asked no questions and kept no records the law might want to see. Thomas Marsh rode up on a gray February morning, his mare's breath steaming in the cold air. He'd told Delilah he was going to town for supplies. He hadn't mentioned that town was 50 miles away, and supplies meant meeting with a private lender. Inside the trading post, a man waited, well-dressed for the frontier, expensive coat that marked him as someone from the city, cold gray eyes that assessed Thomas like a horse at auction. "Mr. Marsh?" The man extended a hand. "Jonathan Blackwood, thank you for meeting me here." "You said you could help with my situation." Thomas shook the offered hand, trying not to show how desperate he was. "The bank turned down my loan application, said I was already too far in debt. Banks are conservative institutions. They don't understand that sometimes a man needs to take risks to get ahead." Blackwood gestured to a table. "Sit. Let's discuss terms." Thomas sat, hat in his hands. "I need $800 to buy equipment, quality seed, one good harvest, and I can pay back everything I owe." One good harvest. Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's what every farmer says. But what if the harvest isn't good? What if the rains don't come or the grasshoppers do? What happens then? It won't. This year will be different. I admire your optimism, Mr. Marsh, truly." Blackwood pulled papers from his coat. "I can lend you the money you need, but my terms are different from a bank's. Higher interest, shorter repayment window. The risk I'm taking requires compensation." Thomas's hands tightened on his hat. "How much higher?" 20% interest, full repayment due in 18 months. The number made Thomas's stomach clench. 20% was robbery. But what choice did he have? The homestead was failing. Delilah was trying so hard not to show her worry, but he could see it eating at her. He needed this loan, needed to prove he could provide for his wife. "All right," he said, 20%, 18 months. And Blackwood slid the papers across the table. "You'll need to sign here and here. 2 witnesses are required. Mr. Holt and I will serve in that capacity." Thomas barely read the papers, just signed where Blackwood pointed, each stroke of the pen feeling like a commitment he didn't fully understand. Blackwood counted out $800 in cash, more money than Thomas had ever seen at once. "Spend it wisely, Mr. Marsh, and remember, 18 months, not a day more." "I'll have it back to you in 12, Thomas promised. "One good harvest, that's all I need." He rode away with the money burning a hole in his saddlebag and hope burning in his chest. What Thomas didn't see was the way Blackwood watched him go, the cold calculation in those gray eyes. What he didn't know was that Blackwood had no intention of being repaid in 12 months, or 18, or ever. Because sometimes the profit wasn't in the repayment, sometimes it was in the default. Blackwood stayed at the trading post for another hour, asking Holt casual questions about Thomas Marsh's homestead, about his wife, about whether the property was worth anything if a debt needed to be collected. "Ain't much there," Holt said. "Small place. Mortgage to the bank already. Man's barely scraping by. But he's married, to a woman who might remarry if something happened to him." Holt gave Blackwood a sharp look. "What are you planning?" "Insurance," Blackwood said simply. "I'm planning insurance." He rode away from Eagles Pass with Thomas Marsh's signature in his pocket and a plan forming in his mind. All he had to do was wait. Sooner or later, the frontier killed men like Thomas Marsh. Men who took foolish risks, who rode into storms, who thought optimism could overcome reality. And when it did, Blackwood would be there. Patient, prepared, ready to collect. 8 months later, the blizzard came. Thomas Marsh died in the snow at Eagles Pass, clutching the reins of a horse that tried to bring him home. 3 days after the storm cleared, a search party went looking for him. 20 men from town and the surrounding homesteads searching the mountain passes for any sign of life. Among them, wearing rough clothes and a full beard, was Jonathan Blackwood. "I'm just passing through," he told the search leader. "Heard there was a man missing. Thought I could help." They found Thomas on the fourth day, frozen solid, horse standing nearby. The search party gathered around the body, somber and respectful. Blackwood stood among them, close enough to see the dead man's face, close enough to confirm identity, close enough to study the way they documented the death, the papers they filled out, the signatures they collected. He helped carry the body down the mountain, helped dig the grave when they got back to town, signed the witness log with the other searchers, not his real name, but close enough, J. Blake instead of J. Blackwood. At the funeral, he stood at the back of the church, watched Delilah Marsh weep over her husband's coffin, watched the community rally around her briefly before drifting away, watched her struggle through that first winter alone, and waited. Because a debt didn't disappear just because the debtor died. It transferred, first to the widow, then, if the widow remarried, to her new husband. All Blackwood had to do was wait for the right moment. Wait for her to find someone with property worth claiming, someone who could pay what Thomas Marsh never would. He waited 2 years, watched from a distance as Delilah Marsh barely survived. As the giant from the mountains came courting, as she married Ephraim Cutter and moved to a property worth far more than $800. Then he pulled out the loan documents, added interest for the years of waiting, and filed his claim. Perfect, legal, unassailable. By the time anyone realized what was happening, it would be too late. You understand now, child? This wasn't just debt, it was theft. Premeditated theft, planned over years. Jonathan Blackwood had watched Thomas Marsh die, had helped search for his body, had attended his funeral, and all the while he'd been planning how to profit from that death. That's the kind of evil that walks on 2 legs. The kind that wears a human face and shakes your hand while planning your destruction. But evil has a weakness. It assumes everyone else is as corrupt as it is. It doesn't account for communities that fight back, for friends who remember things, for old women with good memories and long grudges. Blackwood thought he'd planned for everything. He was wrong. The next day, Ephraim rode to the neighboring homesteads, asking about buyers for his cattle. Delilah wanted to go with him, but he insisted she stay. Someone needs to be here in case Morrison comes back with more information, or in case Blackwood himself shows up. The thought of Blackwood appearing at their door made Delilah's skin crawl. What would I even say to him? "You tell him to leave and come back when I'm here." Ephraim's voice was firm. "Don't engage with him. Don't sign anything. Don't make any agreements. I won't." He kissed her forehead and rode away, leaving Delilah alone with her thoughts and her guilt. Ingrid found her an hour later, sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. "Blaming yourself won't change anything," Ingrid said, setting a cup of tea in front of her. "I know, but I can't help it." Delilah wrapped her hands around the cup without drinking. "Everything Ephraim built, everything he worked for, it's all going to be destroyed because I married him, because I brought Thomas's debts with me." "Thomas's debts aren't your fault." "Aren't they? I signed papers without reading them, trusted him when he said everything was fine, never asked hard questions about where money was coming from." Delilah's voice cracked. "I was stupid and trusting, and now Ephraim is paying the price." "You were a wife who loved her husband. That's not a crime." "It is when it costs someone else everything." Ingrid sat down across from her. "Listen to me, Mrs. Delilah. I've known Mr. Ephraim for 3 years, watched him build this place, watched him hope for family, watched him nearly give up on finding someone to share it with, and then you came along. And now I'm going to cost him everything. No, now you're going to fight alongside him to keep it." Ingrid's voice was steel. "You're not some helpless widow anymore. You're his wife, his partner. Act like it." The words stung, but they also sparked something in Delilah. Anger, maybe. Or determination. "You're right," she said slowly. "I've been sitting here wallowing when I should be figuring out how to fix this." "That's better. Now drink your tea, and let's think." They spent the afternoon going through what they knew. The debt was for $800 plus 3 years of interest. Ephraim had maybe $200 saved. The cattle might bring 600 if he got a good price. That would be enough to pay off Blackwood, but it would leave them with nothing. No income, no backup, entirely dependent on Ephraim's labor and the mercy of the land. There has to be another way, Delilah muttered. Some way to dispute this debt. Can you prove Thomas didn't borrow the money? No, for all I know he did. It would be just like him to take a risky loan and not tell me about it. Then proving fraud will be difficult. Ingrid tapped her fingers on the table. What do you know about this Blackwood character? Nothing? I've never heard the name before. Morrison said it. And Morrison said he was from Rapid City? Yes, why? Because Rapid City is 200 miles from here. Long way to come to collect a debt from a dead man. Ingrid's eyes narrowed. Especially when he waited 3 years to do it. Why wait so long? Why not file the claim when Thomas first died? Delilah sat up straighter. You're right. That is strange. If he was owed money, he should have filed a claim immediately. Unless he couldn't, Ingrid said. Unless something about the situation wasn't right, and he needed time to... She trailed off, thinking. To what? I don't know yet, but something's wrong here. I can feel it. Before they could discuss further, they heard horses approaching. Multiple horses. Delilah went to the window, and her heart sank. Samuel Morrison was back, but this time he wasn't alone. With him was a thin man in an expensive coat, riding a horse too fine for frontier travel. Jonathan Blackwood had come to inspect his prize. Delilah met them on the porch, spine straight, chin high. She wouldn't let this man see her afraid. Mrs. Cutter, Morrison tipped his hat, looking uncomfortable. Mr. Blackwood insisted on viewing the property. Given the pending claim, he has a legal right. My husband isn't here, Delilah interrupted. That's quite all right. Blackwood dismounted smoothly. Up close, he was older than she'd expected. Maybe 40, with cold gray eyes and a smile that never reached them. I won't take much of your time, just a brief inspection to confirm the property valuation. Everything about him set Delilah's teeth on edge. The expensive clothes that mocked the frontier's hardships, the condescending tone, the way his eyes assessed their home like a merchant evaluating inventory. The property isn't yours yet, Delilah said firmly. Indeed not, but in 30 days, unless the debt is satisfied. He let the sentence hang. Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that. He walked around the yard, Morrison trailing behind like an apologetic shadow. Blackwood examined the barn, the fences, the house itself, making notes in a small leather book. Delilah stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching. Something about him nagged at her. Something familiar, though she couldn't place it. Fine property, Blackwood said, returning to where she stood. Your husband built this himself? He did. Impressive. A man of considerable industry. Blackwood's smile was oily. It would be a shame to see all that hard work transfer to someone else, but debt must be satisfied. I'm sure you understand. I understand that my husband's death left behind complications, but I don't understand why you waited 3 years to file a claim. Blackwood's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Legal proceedings take time, Mrs. Cutter, especially when the debtor is deceased and his widow has relocated. Relocated? I lived in the same homestead for 2 years after Thomas died. You could have found me any time. Could I? His voice was mild, but there was steel underneath. A widow without resources, living alone on a failing homestead? What would have been the point? You had nothing worth claiming. The bluntness of it took Delilah's breath away. So you waited until I remarried someone with property. I waited until there were assets sufficient to satisfy the debt. That's sound business practice, Mrs. Cutter, not personal. It feels personal. I assure you it isn't. Blackwood mounted his horse. You have 29 days remaining. I suggest you and your husband use them wisely. Good day, Mrs. Cutter. He rode away with Morrison in tow, leaving Delilah shaking with anger and something else, something she couldn't quite name. Why did he seem so familiar? When Ephraim returned that evening, Delilah told him about Blackwood's visit, watched his jaw tighten, his hands clench. He came here? To our home? He said he had a legal right to inspect the property. Legal right. Ephraim's voice was dangerous. Did he threaten you? Not exactly. But Ephraim, Delilah hesitated. There's something wrong about him, about this whole situation. Ingrid and I were talking. Why would he wait 3 years to file the claim? Why not go after me when Thomas first died? Because you had nothing worth taking then, Ephraim paced the kitchen. He's a vulture, Delilah, waiting for the corpse to ripen before he feeds. But how did he even know about Thomas's death? How did he know I'd remarried? Rapid City is 200 miles away. These things don't just get advertised. Ephraim stopped pacing. You're right. He'd have to be keeping track somehow, watching. His eyes met hers. Or he was already here, in the territory, when Thomas died. The thought sent a chill down Delilah's spine. That doesn't make sense. Why would a lender from Rapid City be in Dakota Territory 3 years ago? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Ephraim grabbed his coat. I'm riding to the Henley place. Carl knows everyone in 3 counties. If Blackwood was here 3 years ago, someone will remember. It's getting dark. I don't care. We have 29 days, Delilah. I'm not wasting a single one. He kissed her hard and fast, then was gone, riding into the gathering dusk. Delilah stood at the window, watching his silhouette disappear. Ingrid came to stand beside her. That man is fighting for you, Ingrid said quietly. Fighting for your marriage, your future together. I know. Do you? Because sometimes I think you still see yourself as the widow who brought nothing but trouble. But you're not that anymore. You're Mrs. Ephraim Cutter. And it's time you started fighting like it. Delilah looked at Ingrid's weathered face, seeing certainty there, seeing strength. You're right, she said. I've been passive too long. What can I do? Start by remembering everything you can about Thomas's last months. Who he talked to, where he went, any mention of loans or debts or men from out of territory. Delilah closed her eyes, thinking back. Those last months before Thomas died. He'd been anxious, working long hours. Making trips, he said, were for supplies, but sometimes seemed to take longer than necessary. And one trip in particular, February, right before the blizzard season. He'd been gone for 3 days, came back with money he said was from selling equipment, but they hadn't owned equipment worth that much. He went somewhere in February, Delilah said slowly, 3 years ago, right before he died. He was gone 3 days, came back with cash. Said he'd sold tools to a trader. What trader? He didn't say. Just said it was good money. We could buy seed for spring. Delilah opened her eyes. What if that's when he took the loan? What if he met Blackwood somewhere out in the territory? Then someone might remember seeing them together, might remember Thomas with a well-dressed stranger. Hope flickered in Delilah's chest. If they could prove Blackwood had been in the territory, if they could find witnesses to the loan arrangement, maybe they could challenge it. Find some technicality, some flaw. It wasn't much, but it was something. And right now, something was all they had. Ephraim returned near midnight, ice crusting his coat and exhaustion lining his face. Carl's going to ask around, he said, accepting the hot coffee Delilah pressed into his hands. He knows a lot of people. Someone might remember a well-dressed stranger from Rapid City 3 years back. It's a slim chance. It's all we've got. Ephraim drained half the coffee in one gulp. I also talked to the cattle buyers. Best offer I got was $500 for the whole herd. Delilah's heart sank. That's not enough. Even with your savings, I know. Which means I'll need to sell more than just cattle. His voice was flat. The horses, most of our equipment, anything of value. Ephraim, you can't. I can, and I will. He set down the cup, his expression grim. This house is worth more than any livestock or equipment. It's our home. It's where we're building our life. I won't let some debt collector take it from us. But without equipment, without stock, how will you make a living? I'll figure it out. I always do. He pulled her close. What matters is keeping what we have, you and me under this roof. Everything else is negotiable. Delilah buried her face in his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him. Wood smoke and leather, and the faint tang of sweat from hard riding. He was willing to sacrifice everything, his livelihood, his security, his future, all because she'd married him carrying debts she didn't even know existed. This isn't fair to you, she whispered. Life isn't fair, but we face it together. He tilted her face up, forcing her to meet his eyes. You hear me, Delilah? Together. Not you blaming yourself, not me resenting you. Together. Together, she echoed. But as they climbed the stairs to bed, Delilah couldn't shake the feeling that together might not be enough. Not against a man like Jonathan Blackwood, who'd waited 3 years for his moment. Not against a debt that seemed designed to destroy them. Not against the possibility that everything they'd built could be taken away in 29 days. The next morning, Martha Henley arrived with Carl in tow, both of them grim-faced. We've been asking questions, Carl said without preamble, about men from Rapid City, about strangers in the territory 3 years back. And? Ephraim leaned forward. Nothing concrete. But old Jeb Holt at the Eagles Pass trading post remembers someone matching Blackwood's description. Said a fancy-dressed man came through in February of 1870, conducted some kind of business meeting. With Thomas? Delilah asked. Jeb didn't say. Man's memory isn't what it was, but he remembers the coat, expensive, out of place, and he remembers the man asking about property values in the area. Ingrid had been listening quietly. Now she spoke up. Property values? Why would a lender care about property values unless he was planning to claim property? Exactly. Carl's expression was dark. This smells wrong, folks. A man doesn't ask about property values before making a loan unless he's already planning for the borrower to default. But that would mean... Delilah couldn't finish the sentence. It would mean Blackwood set Thomas up from the start, Martha said quietly. Gave him a loan he knew couldn't be repaid. Waited for him to die or fail, then moved in to claim the property. That's fraud, Ephraim said. Maybe. But proving it is another matter. Carl pulled out a folded paper. I wired the territorial marshal, told him the situation. He says without evidence of criminal intent, the debt stands. Blackwood has proper documentation. The signature appears genuine. Of course it's genuine. Thomas signed it, but he was manipulated into signing. Delilah's hands clenched. There has to be something we can do. There might be. Ingrid's voice was thoughtful. If we can prove Blackwood had ulterior motives. If we can show he specifically targeted Thomas because of the property, or if we can find anyone who witnessed the loan agreement and can testify to coercion or misrepresentation. That's a lot of ifs, Ephraim said. It is, but it's more than we had yesterday. Carl looked at each of them in turn. I've put the word out, asked folks to remember back 3 years. Anyone who might have seen Thomas with a stranger, anyone who might have heard him talk about a loan. It's a long shot, but it's all we have, Delilah finished. Thank you, Carl. Martha, for helping us. Your family, Martha said simply. We take care of our own. After the Henleys left, Ingrid stayed behind to help with the midday meal. She worked in silence for a while, then spoke without looking up from the onions she was chopping. I've been trying to remember something about the search party when we looked for Thomas. Delilah went still. The search party? I was there, helped coordinate the food and supplies while the men searched. Ingrid's knife paused. There were a lot of volunteers, men from town, neighboring homesteads, and a few strangers who happened to be passing through and offered to help. Strangers? It's not uncommon. Frontier code. You help search for lost souls, even if you don't know them. Ingrid resumed chopping, but her movements were slower now. Thoughtful. One of the strangers, I remember he had a beard, dressed in rough clothes, but they looked new, like he'd bought them specifically for the search. Delilah's pulse quickened. What did he look like under the beard? I don't know. The beard covered most of his face. Ingrid's brow furrowed. But he had cold eyes, gray. I remember thinking it was odd. He was helping search, doing good work, but his eyes were cold, calculating. Gray eyes. Delilah's breath came faster. Blackwood has gray eyes. Half the men in the territory have gray eyes. But how many of them would volunteer for a search party while wearing brand-new rough clothes, while hiding their face with a beard? Delilah grabbed Ingrid's arm. What if it was him? What if Blackwood was there when they found Thomas's body? Why would he? Ingrid stopped. Understanding dawned in her eyes. To confirm Thomas was dead, to witness it himself, and to get access to the death records. To see Thomas's signature on official documents. Delilah's mind was racing now. If he was part of the search party, he could have signed the witness log, could have seen all the paperwork, could have copied Thomas's signature later, Ingrid finished, used it to forge additional loan documents if he needed to. They stared at each other, the implications sinking in. "We need to check the search party records," Delilah said. "See who signed the log, compare the signatures." Records would be at the church. Reverend Morrison kept them. "Then that's where we're going." Delilah was already moving toward the door. "Ephraim!" He appeared from the barn, saw her face, and came running. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything might be right." Delilah quickly explained Ingrid's memory, the theory about Blackwood being at the search. "We need to go to town. Check the church records." Ephraim didn't hesitate. "I'll hitch the wagon." 20 minutes later, they were on the road to town, Delilah's heart pounding with something that felt dangerously like hope. If Blackwood had been at the search, if his signature was in that log, they could place him in the territory at the time of Thomas's death. Could start to build a case that this wasn't just debt collection, but something more sinister. It wasn't proof of fraud. Not yet. But it was a beginning. Reverend Morrison welcomed them into the church office with surprise and concern. "Mrs. Cutter, Mr. Cutter, what brings you to town in such haste?" "The search party records from February 1870, Delilah said. "When you searched for my husband, do you still have them?" "Of course, we keep all official records." Morrison went to a filing cabinet, pulled out a leather-bound book. "Here, every man who participated signed this log." He laid it on the desk. Delilah leaned over it, scanning the names. Most were familiar, neighbors, townsmen, good people who'd given their time to search for a stranger, and near the bottom, in handwriting, she didn't recognize J. Blake. "J. Blake," she breathed. "Who was that? Do you remember?" Morrison studied the signature. "One of the drifters who volunteered. I remember him vaguely. Quiet man. Kept to himself. Had a beard, I think. What else do you remember about him?" "Not much. He helped carry the body down, stayed for the funeral. Then he was gone. Probably moved on to wherever he was headed." Morrison looked between them. "Why? Is this important?" "It might be." Ephraim pulled out the loan documents Morrison had delivered. "Look at this signature. J. Blackwood." Morrison held the two documents side by side. His eyes widened. "The handwriting is similar, very similar." "J. Blake, J. Blackwood." Delilah's voice shook. "He was here, Reverend. The man claiming my husband owed him money was here when Thomas died. Helped search for him. Attended his funeral, all while planning to collect on a debt that might not even be real." Morrison's face had gone pale. "That would be... Mrs. Cutter, are you suggesting this debt is fraudulent?" "I'm suggesting it's awfully convenient. A lender from Rapid City just happens to be in the territory when his borrower dies, just happens to help search for the body, then waits 3 years to file a claim right after the widow remarries someone with property." Delilah met his eyes. "That's not convenience, Reverend. That's planning. But the signature on the loan document could have been copied, or forged, or signed under duress." Ephraim's voice was hard. "Thomas might have owed Blackwood money, or Blackwood might have manufactured the whole thing. Either way, we need to investigate further." Morrison nodded slowly. "I'll write to the marshal. Explain what you've found. It's not proof, but it's enough to warrant scrutiny." "How long will that take?" Delilah asked. "Weeks? Maybe a month?" "We have 27 days before Blackwood can claim the property." Morrison's expression was sympathetic but firm. "I'll do what I can to delay proceedings. But Mrs. Cutter, Mr. Cutter, you need to prepare for the possibility that this won't be resolved in time, that you might lose your home regardless." "We're not giving up," Ephraim said. "I'm not suggesting you should. I'm suggesting you protect yourselves. Sell assets to pay the debt if you must. At least then, you'll have the satisfaction of denying Blackwood the property he's been scheming for." They left the church with copied records and a promise that Morrison would wire the marshal that afternoon. It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd had. On the ride back to the mountain, Delilah found herself thinking about the bearded man at Thomas's funeral, about cold gray eyes watching her grieve, about a predator hiding in plain sight, waiting for his moment. "He watched me cry," she said suddenly. "He was there when they buried Thomas, when I stood at that grave and said goodbye, and all the while He was planning this. Ephraim's jaw tightened. I know. How could someone be that cruel, that calculating? Because some people see others as resources to exploit, not human beings to care about. His hand found hers. But we're not going to let him win, Delilah. I don't care what it takes. We're going to expose him for what he is. Delilah squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his certainty. But as the wagon creaked up the mountain road toward home, she couldn't shake the image of those cold, gray eyes, watching, waiting, planning her destruction from the moment Thomas drew his last frozen breath. 27 days left. The investigation had begun. Suspicions were raised. Patterns were emerging. But Blackwood had been planning this for 3 years. He had documentation, witnesses, legal standing. And time was running out. The community was rallying. Carl Henley spreading the word, asking questions. Reverend Morrison writing to the marshal. Even Samuel Morrison, the banker, looking at the debt documents with new skepticism. But would it be enough? Would they find proof before the deadline? Or would Jonathan Blackwood claim his prize, taking everything Mr. Ephraim had built and Mrs. Delilah had finally found? The storm was gathering, and soon, very soon, it would break over all of them. The next week passed in a blur of desperate activity. Carl Henley rode to every homestead within 50 miles, asking questions. Did anyone remember Thomas Marsh with a well-dressed stranger? Did anyone recall a man named Blackwood or Blake passing through in early 1870? Ephraim prepared to sell everything. The cattle buyers came, looked over the herd with calculating eyes, made offers that felt like theft, but were the best they could get. $500 for 24 head of prime beef cattle. Half what they were worth, but desperation had a price. And Delilah? She spent her days going through Thomas's things, the few papers he'd left behind, looking for anything that might help. A mention of Blackwood, a note about the loan, anything. She found nothing. 18 days left, then 17, then 16. The pressure was crushing. Ephraim barely slept, working from dawn past dusk. Delilah caught him once in the barn, head in his hands, shoulders shaking. She'd never seen him cry before. She held him while he broke, this giant of a man who'd been so strong for her. Held him and whispered that they'd survive this, that they'd find a way, that they still had each other. But even as she said the words, doubt gnawed at her. What if they didn't find proof? What if Blackwood really did take everything? Could their marriage survive losing the home Ephraim had built with his own hands? The break came on a cold April morning when they had 15 days left. Carl Henley arrived at dawn with a woman Delilah didn't recognize. She was maybe 40, worn down by hard living, with nervous hands that wouldn't stay still. "This is Sarah Polk," Carl said. "She's got something to tell you." They gathered in the kitchen, Ephraim, Delilah, Ingrid, Carl, and the nervous woman who kept looking at the door like she wanted to run. "It's all right," Delilah said gently. "Whatever you have to say, we'll listen." Sarah took a breath. "I worked at the Eagles Pass trading post. 3 years back, February of 1870. I was cooking and cleaning for Jeb Holt." "You were there when Thomas Marsh met with someone?" Ephraim leaned forward. "I was. I served them coffee while they talked." Sarah's hands twisted in her lap. "The other man, the one in the fancy coat, he paid me $5 not to mention the meeting to anyone, said it was a private business matter." $5 is a lot of money," Delilah said carefully. "Why tell us now?" "Because I've been hearing things. About that same man coming back claiming a debt, trying to take your property." Sarah met Delilah's eyes. "And because $5 3 years ago seemed like a blessing. But knowing I helped a man destroy a family, that's been eating at me ever since I heard." "What did you hear at the meeting?" Ephraim asked. "Not much. I wasn't trying to listen. But I heard the fancy man, Blackwood, I know now, telling your husband that he'd need to repay in 18 months or there would be consequences." "What kind of consequences?" "He didn't say exactly, but the way he said it," Sarah shuddered. "It sounded like a threat, like he wanted Mr. Marsh to fail." "Did my husband seem worried?" Delilah's voice was tight. "He seemed desperate, kept saying this was his last chance, that he couldn't fail his wife again." Sarah's eyes were wet. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Cutter. I should have said something then, should have warned him, but $5 was more than I made in a month." Delilah reached across the table and took the woman's hand. "You're telling us now. That's what matters." "Will this help?" Sarah asked. "Can I testify or something?" "You can, and you will," Carl said firmly. "The marshal needs to hear this. Blackwood's been claiming this was a straightforward loan. But if he was making threats, if he was setting Thomas up to fail, that changes things." After Sarah left with Carl to make a formal statement, Delilah turned to Ephraim. For the first time in weeks, she saw something other than despair in his eyes. She saw hope. 2 days later, Ingrid came to Delilah with trembling hands and eyes bright with remembered anger. "I know where I saw him before," she said without preamble. "Blackwood? At the search party, but not just at the search." Ingrid sat down hard in a kitchen chair. "Mrs. Delilah, I need you to think carefully. At Thomas's funeral, do you remember everyone who came?" "It's a blur. Delilah closed her eyes, trying to recall. "The church was full. Half the town came." "And after, at the graveside?" Wait." Something flickered in Delilah's memory. "There was a man, standing apart from the others, wearing rough clothes but clean ones. He had a beard and he watched the whole service but never came forward to offer condolences." "That's him." Ingrid's voice shook with certainty. "That's Blackwood. I remember now. After they lowered the casket, after everyone else left, he stayed. Stood there looking at the grave like he was calculating something." "You're sure?" "I'm sure. And there's more." Ingrid pulled a piece of paper from her apron pocket. "I went to see Reverend Morrison yesterday. Asked to see the death certificate records. Look at this." She spread the paper on the table. "Thomas Marsh's death certificate dated February 1870. Cause of death, exposure. Body found by search party. Witnesses to identification, 6 signatures, including J. Blake." "He witnessed the death certificate," Delilah breathed, "which means he saw Thomas's signature on all the official documents, which means he had access to perfect examples of your husband's handwriting." Ephraim had come in from the barn, drawn by the urgency in their voices. "Examples he could use to forge other documents. Or to verify that the signature on a loan document was genuine," Ingrid added. "Either way, it proves he was here, in the territory, at the exact time Thomas died. And he's been lying about it." Delilah felt anger kindle in her chest, burning away weeks of guilt and fear. "He told Morrison he'd been trying to collect through proper channels, that he only filed the claim now because legal proceedings take time. But he was here, Ephraim. He watched them bury Thomas, and he said nothing about a debt. Because he was waiting," Ephraim's voice was hard, "waiting to see what you'd do, if you'd remarry. If the new husband would have assets worth claiming." "That's not debt collection," Ingrid said. "That's fraud, premeditated fraud." They had 13 days left, but now they had evidence, testimony, a pattern of deception. It still might not be enough, but it was something to fight with. The summons came 8 days before the deadline. A hearing had been scheduled in town. Judge Harrison, traveling through on circuit, would hear the case. Both parties were required to appear. Delilah dressed in her best dress, still worn, still patched, but clean. Ephraim wore the borrowed suit from their wedding, looking uncomfortable but determined. The hearing was held in the church, the only building large enough to accommodate the crowd, because half the town had come to watch. This was entertainment for some, justice for others, and a test of community values for everyone. Jonathan Blackwood sat at one table with a lawyer he'd brought from Rapid City. Delilah and Ephraim sat at another with Carl Henley, not a lawyer, but the closest thing to an advocate they had. Judge Harrison was a weathered man in his 60s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He banged his gavel and the room fell silent. This hearing concerns a debt claim filed by Mr. Jonathan Blackwood against Mr. and Mrs. Ephraim Cutter, derived from a loan allegedly made to the late Thomas Marsh. Mr. Blackwood, present your case. Blackwood's lawyer stood, smooth and professional. Your Honor, the case is straightforward. Mr. Marsh borrowed $1,000 from my client in February 1870. The loan was documented, witnessed, and legitimate. Mr. Marsh died before repayment. The debt transferred to his widow, and upon her remarriage, to her new husband. We're simply seeking what is legally owed. He presented the loan documents. They looked official, legitimate, unassailable. Mr. Henley, do you dispute the validity of this debt? Carl stood. We do, Your Honor. We believe this debt is fraudulent and that Mr. Blackwood has engaged in a pattern of deception designed to defraud my friends of their property. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Blackwood's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those cold gray eyes. Those are serious accusations, the judge said. Do you have evidence? We do. Carl gestured to the back of the room. We call Sarah Polk to testify. Sarah came forward, hands shaking but voice steady. She told about the meeting at the trading post, about Blackwood's threats, about being paid to keep silent. Blackwood's lawyer objected. Hearsay, Your Honor. Mrs. Polk admits she only heard portions of the conversation. She cannot testify to Mr. Blackwood's intent. Overruled. Continue, Mrs. Polk. Sarah told everything she remembered. When she finished, Carl called Ingrid. Mrs. Halverson, you were part of the search party that found Thomas Marsh's body? I was. And you saw a man there who later attended the funeral? A man with a beard, wearing new rough clothes, who stayed at the gravesite after everyone else left? I did. Can you identify that man? Ingrid pointed directly at Blackwood. That's him. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel for silence. Mr. Blackwood, Judge Harrison's voice was cold. Were you in the Dakota Territory in February 1870? Blackwood stood smoothly. I was passing through on business, Your Honor. I may have assisted with the search. I don't recall specifically. It was 3 years ago. You don't recall helping search for a man who owed you $1,000? I didn't know it was him at the time. The frontier is large, Your Honor. Many men die in the mountains. And the funeral? Did you attend the funeral of the man who owed you money? If I did, it was out of respect, not, did you or did you not sign the witness log as J. Blake when your actual name is J. Blackwood? Silence. Blackwood's composure cracked slightly. I may have used a shortened version of my name. That's not what I asked. The judge consulted the documents in front of him. You signed official death records as J. Blake. You attended the funeral under false identity. You said nothing about a debt at the time. Then you waited 3 years until Mrs. Marsh remarried a man with property before filing your claim. The timing was convenient. The judge's tone was sharp. Mr. Blackwood, this court deals in facts, not coincidences. And the facts suggest a pattern of calculated deception. Your Honor, Blackwood's lawyer interjected, even if my client was present in the territory, that doesn't invalidate the debt. The loan documents are legitimate. The signature is genuine. Whether Mr. Blackwood chose to collect immediately or later is his prerogative as a creditor. The judge leaned back, thinking. Delilah held her breath. They'd proven Blackwood had lied. But had they proven the debt was fraudulent? Mr. Henley, the judge said finally, do you have evidence that the debt itself is false, that the loan documents are forged, or that Mr. Marsh did not, in fact, borrow this money? Carl's shoulders sagged. No, Your Honor, we can prove Mr. Blackwood has been deceptive, but we can't prove the debt doesn't exist. Then, I'm afraid, the church door banged open. A man stood in the doorway, backlit by afternoon sun. When he stepped inside, Delilah saw it was Peter Grafton, the man from Ephraim's past, the man whose father's lies had driven Ephraim into isolation. Your Honor, Peter said, voice shaking, I have something to say about Mr. Cutter and about what this town owes him. Peter Grafton walked to the front of the church like a man approaching his own execution. Your Honor, I know this isn't about me, but before you rule on this debt, the people in this room need to know who they're defending. They need to know the truth about Ephraim Cutter. Ephraim half rose from his seat. Peter, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Peter turned to face the crowd. 20 years ago, I was 17 and stupid. I climbed on moving equipment at the sawmill to show off for my friends. I lost my balance. I was going to fall into the saw blade. His voice got stronger as he spoke, years of guilt pouring out. Ephraim Cutter grabbed me, pulled me back, saved my life. But he pulled hard, had to get me clear, and he broke my arm, dislocated my shoulder. The church was silent as stone. My father was drunk, saw me screaming, saw Ephraim holding me, and he started a lie, said Ephraim attacked me out of jealousy. that he was dangerous, violent, couldn't control his strength. Peter's eyes were wet. I tried to tell the truth. My father beat me silent. He looked at Ephraim, 20 years of shame in his eyes. I let you take the blame for saving my life. I let this town fear you and judge you for 20 years. And I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. Ephraim stood slowly, crossed to Peter. And instead of anger, instead of the condemnation Peter clearly expected, he pulled the smaller man into a hug. I forgave you a long time ago, Ephraim said quietly. You were a kid, scared of your father. I understood. But I cost you. You cost me nothing. I wasn't willing to give up. Ephraim released him, turned to address the crowd. I chose to live alone because it was easier than fighting people's fear, but that was my choice. I don't blame Peter. Never did. Reverend Morrison stood from where he'd been sitting in the congregation. Your Honor, if I may, I think Mr. Grafton's testimony is more relevant than it might appear. How so? It speaks to character. This town has judged Ephraim Cutter harshly for 20 years based on a lie. We believe the worst because it was easier than seeing the truth. Morrison's voice rang through the church. Now we have a man, Mr. Blackwood, who has lied about his identity, lied about his presence in the territory, and who has waited 3 years to collect a debt in the most financially devastating way possible. Are we going to make the same mistake twice? Are we going to believe a liar over a man who has shown nothing but integrity? Judge Harrison held up a hand. Reverend, I appreciate the sentiment. But this is a court of law, not a referendum on character. Then let's talk about law, Carl Henley said. Your Honor, even if the debt is legitimate, the manner of collection is suspect. Mr. Blackwood deliberately waited until Mrs. Cutter remarried someone with substantial assets. That suggests the debt is being used as a weapon, not collected in good faith. My client has every right to wait for assets sufficient to satisfy, Blackwood's lawyer began. Does he? Carl interrupted. Or does the deliberate delay combined with the false identity and the witnessing of death records constitute fraud? Your Honor, we're asking for time. Time to investigate this debt thoroughly. Time for the territorial marshal to examine Mr. Blackwood's business practices. Don't let him take this property based on documents that may be legitimate but are certainly suspicious. The judge was silent for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. Mr. Blackwood, I'm not satisfied with your testimony. Your presence in the territory at the time of Mr. Marsh's death, combined with your false identity on official records, raises serious questions about your credibility. Your Honor, I'm not dismissing the debt, but I'm not allowing you to claim property based on it either. Not yet. The judge's gavel came down. I'm ordering a full investigation by the territorial marshal. Until that investigation is complete, the debt claim is suspended. This hearing is adjourned. The church erupted, some in celebration, others in outrage. Blackwood's face went white with fury. Delilah grabbed Ephraim's hand as relief flooded through her. They hadn't won. Not completely. But they'd bought time, a chance to fight. This isn't over, Blackwood said, leaning across the aisle toward them. I will collect what's owed, one way or another. Maybe, Ephraim said quietly, but not today, and not from my wife. As they filed out of the church, the townspeople who'd spent 20 years avoiding Ephraim Cutter began one by one to approach, to apologize, to shake his hand, to welcome him, finally, into their community. It had taken a crisis and Peter Grafton's confession, but the town was beginning to see what Delilah had known from the start. Ephraim Cutter was a good man, and he'd been wronged for far too long. That night, after the hearing, after the celebration at the Henley place, after the exhausting parade of neighbors offering belated friendship, Delilah and Ephraim finally returned home. Ingrid had made herself scarce, leaving them a cold supper and a fire in the hearth. The house was quiet, peaceful. They sat by the fire, not speaking, just being together. The weight of the past weeks slowly lifting. We're not out of danger yet, Ephraim said finally. The investigation could still find the debt is legitimate. I know, Delilah rested her head on his shoulder, but we have time now, and we have the community on our side. Because of Peter, Ephraim's voice was soft. 20 years he's been carrying that guilt. I never wanted that for him. You're a better man than most. Delilah looked up at him. You forgave him for stealing 20 years of your life. He didn't steal them. I chose to spend them alone rather than fight for acceptance. Ephraim touched her face gently. But that's over now, thanks to you. I didn't do anything. You stood up for me in front of the whole town when we barely knew each other. You defended me today. You fought beside me through this whole nightmare. His eyes held hers. You've given me more than I ever hoped to find, Delilah. Something in his voice, in the way he looked at her, made Delilah's heart race. Over the past weeks, through the crisis and fear and desperation, something had changed between them. The careful partnership had deepened into something more. Ephraim, she said quietly, do you remember what you said when you proposed, that you weren't asking me to love you, just to let you take care of me? I remember. I need to tell you something. She took his large hand in both of hers. You were wrong, or I was, or we both were. What do you mean? I love you. The words came out simple and sure. Not the way I loved Thomas. That was young love, untested love. This is different. This is knowing who you are and loving you anyway. Loving you because of who you are. Ephraim went very still. Delilah, let me finish. You're patient when I'm scared, strong when I'm weak, honest when I need truth. You've sacrificed everything to protect our home. You've forgiven me for bringing debt I didn't know existed. You've shown me what real partnership looks like. She pressed his hand to her cheek. I love you, Ephraim Cutter, and I need you to know that. For a moment he just stared at her, eyes bright with unshed tears. Then he pulled her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. I've loved you since I watched you split wood in your yard, he said, voice rough with emotion. I've loved you through every awkward conversation and every quiet breakfast, and every night I slept alone because I was too afraid to push you. I love you so much, it terrifies me. They held each other while the fire burned low. Outside, April wind whispered through the pines. Inside, two people who'd started as strangers were finally, truly married. When they made love that night, it was different from every time before. Not trying to make a baby, not seeking comfort. Just loving each other completely, holding nothing back. Afterward, lying in the darkness, Delilah felt something she'd thought she'd lost forever. Peace. 3 weeks later, the territorial marshal issued his report. The investigation had uncovered a pattern. Blackwood had targeted at least 5 other families across 3 territories with similar schemes. Private loans to desperate men, followed by long waits until circumstances created maximum leverage for collection. Thomas's debt existed, but the loan agreement had included clauses Blackwood hadn't disclosed, clauses that made default almost inevitable, predatory lending practices that bordered on criminal. The debt was ruled unenforceable. Blackwood was arrested for fraud and conspiracy. He would stand trial in the territorial capital. The Cutters' property was safe. Ephraim got his cattle back from the buyers who'd been waiting for the case to resolve. The community helped him repair the fences winter had damaged, plant spring crops, rebuild what the crisis had threatened. And through it all, Delilah felt strange, off somehow, tired in a way that had nothing to do with the work they were doing. At first, she thought it was relief, the stress of nearly losing everything, finally releasing. But when her courses were 2 weeks late, then 3, a different possibility began to form. She waited another week, afraid to hope, afraid to disappoint Ephraim if she was wrong. But when Martha came for a visit and took one look at her, the older woman knew immediately. "You're pregnant," Martha said. Not a question. Delilah's hands went to her stomach. "I think so, maybe. I don't know for certain." "I know for certain. I've seen that look on enough women's faces," Martha smiled. "Does Ephraim know?" "Not yet. I wanted to be sure. Didn't want to raise his hopes if—" "Oh, honey," Martha pulled her into a hug. "After everything you two have been through, this news is going to make him happier than anything." That evening, after supper, Delilah found Ephraim in the spare room. He was working on the cradle again, the one he'd started years ago, adding final details now that hope was no longer forbidden. "Ephraim?" He looked up, saw her face, and immediately set down his carving tools. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's—" She took a breath. I'm late. 3 weeks late. And I'm tired all the time, and this morning I couldn't stand the smell of coffee." It took him a moment. Then understanding dawned, and his face transformed. "You're pregnant?" "I think so. I haven't seen a doctor yet, but Martha seems certain, and She didn't get to finish. Ephraim swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet, laughing and crying at the same time. "We did it," he said, voice breaking. "We actually did it." "We did." Delilah held him tight. "By spring, not winter. You were early." "I don't care about the timing." He set her down gently, hands going to her still flat stomach. "You're carrying our child, Delilah, our child." That night, lying in bed with Ephraim's hand resting protectively on her belly, Delilah thought about the journey that had brought them here. From desperate widow and lonely giant to partners to lovers to expectant parents. It hadn't been the romance story people told. It had been better, real, built on choice and commitment rather than just passion. "Ephraim?" she whispered into the darkness. "Hmm? I'm glad I pointed that rifle at you." His laugh rumbled through his chest. "So am I. Best decision you ever made." "Second best," she corrected. "Best was saying yes." "Now, child, let me tell you how this story ends, or rather, how it begins again." Summer came warm and golden, Mrs. Delilah's pregnancy progressed without complication, though she complained mightily about the heat and her swelling feet. The community that had shunned Mr. Ephraim for 20 years embraced him fully now. Men came to help with harvest. Women brought baby clothes and advice. The Cutters' home became a gathering place, ironic given how isolated it had once been. In August, on a night when heat lightning flickered on the horizon, Mrs. Delilah went into labor. I attended along with the doctor from town and Martha Henley. Mr. Ephraim paced the porch like a caged bear, terrified and useless in the way men always are when babies come. The labor was long but not dangerous, and when the sun rose on a new day, a baby's cry split the morning air. A boy. Large but not giant, healthy and strong and perfect in every way. Mr. Ephraim came into the room like he was approaching something holy, held his son with hands that could break stone but cradled the baby gentle as anything. "What should we name him?" Mrs. Delilah asked, exhausted but glowing. Mr. Ephraim was quiet for a long moment, looking at his son's face. "Eric," he said finally, "after my grandfather, Eric Thomas Cutter," including Thomas, honoring the past while embracing the future. "Perfect," Mrs. Delilah whispered. "I watched them there, the giant and the widow and the baby they'd made together, and thought about promises, about the ones we keep and the ones we break and the ones that transform into something we never expected." Mr. Ephraim had promised his father to continue the line. He'd done that. He'd promised Mrs. Delilah she'd have his son by winter. He'd been early, but he'd kept it. Most importantly, he'd promised to stand beside her through whatever came. And that promise, more than any other, had made all the difference. That baby boy grew up strong and kind. He inherited his father's size, not quite 7 feet, but close, and his mother's stubborn spirit. He married your cousin next month, child, and they'll live in the house his father built, raise their children in the cradle his grandfather carved. The Norwegian giants? They're gone. But their legacy isn't in height or strength. It's in love that outlasts fear, in promises kept even when the timing's wrong, in two people choosing each other every day, building something that lasts. Mrs. Delilah lived to be 78. Mr. Ephraim made it to 76, passed peaceful in his sleep, her hand in his. She followed him 6 months later, couldn't bear to be without him after everything they'd been through together. They had 4 more children after Eric, a good life, a full life, the kind of life worth fighting for. And it all started with a desperate widow pointing a rifle at a lonely giant who'd been watching her for weeks, working up the courage to speak. Some promises are made in whispers, others in the howling wind of a Dakota winter. But the ones that matter most, those are the ones we keep when everything's against us, the ones we choose every single day. That's the real story, child. Not the marriage of convenience or the debt they overcame, or even the baby that finally came. It's the story of 2 people learning that love isn't where you start. It's where you end up when you keep choosing each other, keep showing up, keep believing that tomorrow can be better than today. Now help me up. All this talking has worn me out. But I'm glad I told you. Someone should remember how it really was.